Hello, everybody. Welcome to the World Vaccine Day. I'm Joe Schmidt. I'm Professor of Infectious Disease and Vaccine Development, and I'm also now Editor-in-Chief with Global Health Press. And Global Health Press is based in Singapore, and that is why we're sitting in front of the skyline of Singapore, close to Marina Bay Sands. So welcome, everybody, again. And with me here in Nierstein in Germany are Daniela Lamarca, who is the publisher of Global Health Press. Daniela.
Hello, warm welcome from the whole Global Health Press team. Hi.
Thank you, Daniela. And to my left side is Heikki Peltola, a long-term friend from Finland. We have been working on vaccines for 20 years altogether with some interruptions. And we both just returned from Athens from the ESPID meeting. So Heikki, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
And also with us here is Kristina Rynkiewicz. She is a doctor of medicine from the Ukraine, and she is currently working as my assistant with Global Health Press.
Hello, everyone from the different part of the world. We hope you enjoy our event today.
Thank you, Kristina. Yeah, the event will be like 4 hours. It will be live streaming, but we will also save it on the Global Health Press website, and you will be able to download it for the next couple of months. We have a 4-hour symposium. Basically, it's 2 parts. We have 4 presentations in the beginning, or 5. We will hear everything about COVID. That is next. Then we will hear the story of measles. It's not only about measles elimination, but many different historical aspects of measles. And I'm very grateful that Heikki could do that. Then we have a very important topic with Yauba Saidu, who is in the call. We videotaped it to be on the safe side that there is no internet interruption. So we broadcast everything here from Germany, but we didn't want to have anybody dial in from the outside and then suddenly disappear. So welcome Yauba, who is also here with us. And then we will have a little bit introduction to the national immunization technology groups. They give advice which vaccines to recommend in a country. That is the first part. And then we have an evaluation of vaccination system in different countries. We selected 8, and that is what you're going to see in the second half. Without any further delay, I am going to start the video that was given to me by Robert Boy. And without any further delay, here is the presentation by Robert.
My name is Professor Robert Boy. I'm a professor at the University of Sydney in an honorary capacity in infectious diseases, child and adolescent health, vaccinology and epidemiology. My topic today is COVID-19. I particularly want to use the alliteration of variants, antivirals, vaccines and vaccine hesitancy. I want to pay credit to some colleagues at the Children's Hospital Westmead with whom I work, Associate Professors Phil Britton and Nicholas Wood. And I want to get straight into talking to you. I really want to talk about what is current and what is perhaps going to happen in the near future. You've heard a lot about COVID, so you know a lot. So I want to give you stuff that's really up to the minute, if I possibly can, and that is practical to your daily existence. The kind of topics I want to cover include long COVID, emergencies, briefly, clinical trial data from trials of vaccines and antivirals, some of the side effects like myocarditis, some of the issues like hesitancy, some of the new drugs. Particularly I want to talk about a prophylactic drug for pre-exposure called Evusheld. I'll come to that. And a few mentions of whether we should have vaccination for preschool, which we don't yet have, whether we should be travelling overseas already, some people are going to Bali, and whether we are likely to have twindemics with flu or RSV or other viral or other bacterial infections becoming much commoner. So medical emergencies, I've just attended a lecture by Zoom from the Chief Health Officer, the Chief Medical Officer of the UK, and his name is Chris Whitty, and he made some very erudite observations, and I'm going to summarise them in 1 minute. Medical emergencies, whether they're floods or they're a medical pandemic, are rare, but somewhere in the world they're happening all the time. They require many real actors, doctors, public health officials, other people to respond to them. And not just in the movies where you can see Don't Look Up or you can see Contagion, movies that stylize and idealize Not just a few brave film actors, many thousands like yourselves have been crucial to the management of COVID. So good science is necessary to do this well. And the prediction of risk is really difficult. Because it has low sensitivity, we find it hard to find, and low specificity, we get it wrong. And there are lots of doomsayers, including in public health, and some of you might point to some modelers always over-predicting COVID, or you might look at weather forecasters. Early warning, however, is possible, and it can guide our response. There are golden hours and golden days in which we can take measures to do better. Famines are predictable, they're happening all the time. Floods are predictable too, but only within days. When and where are predictable. What and where, but not when, is applicable to earthquakes. So when might be in a day, a month, or a century. And what about infectious diseases? Well, we don't know where or when or how big flu pandemics are coming. We know they are coming. But even worse, the new novel corona pandemic, we didn't know what, where, when, or how. So it's been a huge challenge. So science can predict where with floods, but it's hard to predict when and how big. And everyone's saying that Lismore and other places had worse floods than ever. If we look to only last year, 2021, in Germany, entire towns in northwestern Germany, near Belgium and Holland, went underwater. And German headlines called it a Jahrhundertflut, a 100-year flood. It was actually predicted a week ahead, and scientists were onto it. And they were telling the government to act, to take mitigation. So this was an occasion when the flood could have been mitigated much better than it was, and perhaps ours too could be better predicted as well. So the impacts of floods are on loss of lives, loss of livelihood, education and health. And likewise, that happens with COVID. The impacts of flood include so waterborne disease, airborne disease, the crowding when people are in shelters together, vector-borne diseases, mosquitoes. There's a lot, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So here's something that came up only early in March, and that is that COVID-19 can produce a long syndrome which can actually shrink the brain. This was published in Nature from an Oxford group where they looked at over 400 people before and after COVID. And they found that there was shrinkage in certain parts of the brain of grey matter to do with memory and mood, and especially to do with smell, the olfactory region. The equivalent defect was about 1% loss of brain volume. So small but significant. However, we know as clinicians that people recover well from COVID, and they can recover in days, weeks, or months. And we know the risk factors for getting long COVID include a prior history of EBV fatigue, a prior history of diabetes mellitus, and a high viral load. 15 studies were just reviewed and published, again, only in early March, showing that long COVID could be halved in its incidence if you'd been previously vaccinated. So that's an important message. The Medical Research Future Fund of Australia in 2021 set out to address some of the important questions. They're listed on this slide. And Stream 1 looked at the long COVID effects of people positive for COVID-19 to try and improve the understanding of risk factors and better management. I'll keep going. So treatments for long COVID. They're being studied too, especially out of the UK, but other places as well. And statins and apixaban are at the front of the queue. Now, statins are interesting. We know they're anti-inflammatory. Atorvastatin, for example, was studied and published last year in the BMJ, an ICU-based study, or an RCT, and it didn't show any benefit. So RCTs often show us things which are more negative than speculative observational studies. However, a systematic review of 7 studies showed an almost 50% reduction in mortality if a statin was used in hospital. So there's a difference between observational studies and RCTs, and we need to pay attention to that. Other treatments include an apixaban. It's an oral anticoagulant. I'm personally on it myself, having had some TIAs, and it's being studied carefully for its anticoagulant effect in preventing the symptoms and signs of long COVID. Exercise and sleep, self-medication, drug-drug interactions. I'll come back to drug-drug interactions. I'm going to mention again pre-exposure prophylaxis. 2% of Australians have immunosuppression. That's 500,000 people. That's a lot. And those people who are essentially immunosenescent, old, or immunocompromised from cancer, chemotherapy, immunosuppression from congenital and acquired chronic infection like HIV, all of those people could benefit before they even are exposed with a thing called Evusheld. It's not Evushield, it's Evusheld. It's from AstraZeneca. It's given as a single dose, a short infusion. It's a long-acting antibody, and it's not a vaccine substitute, but in people who've been vaccinated and are immunosuppressed, they can still get COVID. And so they're, especially very immunosuppressed people, would benefit from using this drug. For acute COVID, we've also got treatments. It's not my place today to talk about that. I'll just let you read my slide. But noting that risk factors for severe acute COVID include diabetes, obesity, and hypertension. And there are studies showing real benefit. And can I just point out that in general practice, you can access a drug called molnupiravir, which means simply Thor's hammer, smashing the virus, and you can access soon Paxlovid, which means peace and love, and it's actually more effective. So peace and love is more effective than Thor's hammer in managing COVID, if you see what I mean. So the distribution for GPs and others of oral treatments by the Australian government is prioritised to the highest clinical need. People in rural communities, people in residential aged care facilities, Indigenous people, people living in disability centres. Now, I just show this to frighten you. Paxlovid is commonly an interacting drug with other drugs because it's a cytochrome P450 inhibitor. And all sorts of drugs that treat enlarged prostate, angina, blood pressure, mental health, cholesterol, and erectile dysfunction, all of them can interact, and Paxlovid is contraindicated unless you can stop the other drug. And there's a big long list. And the point of showing this is not for you to read the list, but to see that you need to consider to consult an expert, whether it's an HIV specialist or whether it's a pharmacist, or whether you download an app on your computer. You need to know how to manage the use of oral Paxlovid in primary care. The drug classes of particular concern are listed there. They're drugs that are prone to concentration-dependent toxicities, antiarrhythmics, anticoagulants, immunosuppressants, anticonvulsants, etc. So there are so many contraindications that it's going to preclude the wide use of the drug. And if we're not using the drug as clinicians, we lack the clinical experience to use it again and more. So that's a problem. The National Medical Stockpile has a number of drugs available, and I'll let you look at those there. The Australian guidelines are listed there too. So treatments with monoclonal antibodies for Omicron, the latest variant. Acute COVID, what is still effective against Omicron? What is key about Omicron, the virus, is that it's got 50, 60 mutations compared with the original Wuhan strain, and 30 mutations in the spike protein, and 13 mutations in the receptor binding domain. Goodness, a massive difference, and they lead to immune evasion and to much greater transmission of the virus. So now that we've got BA2 raising its ugly head in 2022, it shows some differences, at least a dozen differences with BA1. BA, it's stealth. I call it the British Airways stealth bomber because it's hard to detect Omicron from other variants because of the PCR effect is hidden when you're trying to compare, say, a Delta variant with an Omicron. Now, an interesting paper just published in March this year from a Japanese group suggests in the New England Journal that sotrovimab, which we've been using for a few months now, may be better for BA2 than BA1. So our treatment, which we've appeared to have lost for BA1, may now be effective again for BA2. That's still early research days, but it's published. What's become ineffective against Omicron is the Eli Lilly product, etesevimab with bamlanivimab. And that was only recommended for use in December 2021 for moderate to severe, for the treatment of moderate to severe or post-exposure prophylaxis of high-risk children and adults. So I won't go on about that. I will go on about this idea of a reproduction number. The virus originally, the Wuhan strain, the ancestral strain, one person could, in a susceptible population, fully susceptible, infect 2.5. When it got to Delta, one person could infect 5. When it got to Omicron, one could infect 10. And now BA2, BA.2, one could infect 13. So it's extraordinarily transmissible. And the hospitalizations as a result, even though it's clinically milder, on average, because there are so many people getting infected, there are some getting it severe and even more getting it severe than with Delta, even though Delta was more virulent. If we look back to Delta figures from the US, we know that children and teenagers and young adults have a very low risk of death from COVID. But once you get to your 30s, the risk increases 4-fold, and in your 50s, it increases 25-fold. So this is a disease of older people, and we know that. So talking about a New England Journal paper from last year on variants and vaccines, I wanted to emphasize that because we have new variants of concern and they have increased transmissibility, thankfully not virulence, the importance, the middle point there, the importance of efficient public health measures and vaccination programs increases. So we need to get those boosters in. And then the third point, the Science Prize winner from the Prime Minister for Australia for this year is Professor Eddie Holmes, a colleague from University of Sydney, and he makes the point that variants escaping immunity are inevitable. So they're coming, they've come already, and they are coming too. And this year we've seen with treatment specifically for the prevention of Omicron, Moderna and others have produced a new mRNA vaccine, which is Omicron specific. It works well for Omicron, but perhaps not for different variants. So this is very challenging. So we're looking at, in the next couple of months, having Omicron specific or multivalent vaccines arriving soon, and whether we will use them as boosters remains open to discussion, but a strong possibility. I've said already the number of mutations in Omicron. The neutralizing antibodies required for the management of Omicron, for its treatment and its prevention, may be as many as 20-fold higher. It's 20-fold less protective for Omicron. Hybrid immunity is a really interesting concept. That means two things combined together. That's natural immunity and vaccine-induced immunity. And we know for some countries like South Africa and the UK, we've measured that perhaps 70% plus of the population have already had wild COVID infection. So they've got some natural immunity, and a high proportion are already vaccinated too. There's a study in the UK which is plotting this. 150,000 people are checked every month for infection. So if we're going to prevent corona and there's going to be mutations, maybe we need a pan-coronavirus vaccine. And that may be the key to fighting the pandemic. A paper just published in the New England Journal discusses this. And Anthony Fauci has said, the head of the US agency, we must prepare for the next generation of coronaviruses with pandemic potential. So an interim statement on COVID vaccines was released by the WHO in March 2022. And it said many things, but it made the point that having previously said we don't need a booster, it probably do need one now. And given the widespread transmission of Omicron globally, every continent, 99% of COVID is currently Omicron or more. So the WHO is tracking the lineages under the umbrella of Omicron, and a new variant may emerge before we have an updated vaccine, and we could be in the shtuk again. So this is an ongoing challenge. And one of the points that WHO and the US are making is that we need to look at what we've done already with flu vaccine production and immunity. And there are valuable lessons because both flu and COVID are RNA vaccines, although they have many differences as well. They can actually be delivered concomitantly, and there's a study from Novavax showing flu and COVID vaccines can be given simultaneously in 2 arms and perhaps given together in 1 arm. So that research is still ongoing. We're expecting to see it soon. Novavax was introduced into Australia in 2022 for adults, and it's picking up that 1 or 2% of people who were hesitant and didn't want an mRNA vaccine. So they're getting vaccinated. Curiously, even though it's a protein-based recombinant with a matrix M as the saponin as the adjuvant to make the immune response to the protein S much stronger. So even though we expect fewer side effects because of the use of an adjuvant, the risk of a local side effect leading to concern or to even a systemic side effect with fever is 2% of people in the last 2 months have been having medical consultations after Novavax compared to 1% with other COVID vaccines. I think that's probably because it's early days and that 2% will quickly fall to 1% as we get used to using it. And secondly, we're dealing with a more nervous population, the hesitants, the 1 or 2% who hadn't previously had a vaccine and were more concerned about what vaccines might do to them. So children face, as a paediatrician, I'm going to focus now for 5-10 minutes on children. Children face a generation-defining disruption because of this pandemic and because of the measures we've taken more than the COVID virus itself. So research has shown that the indirect impacts of the public health measures taken, school closure, etc., may be even more detrimental to well-being of children than catching COVID. Professor Sharon Goldfeld from the Murdoch in Melbourne has published on this, and I've worked with the President of the Royal College of Paediatrics in the UK, Professor Russell Viner, a former Australian. And the key, if you go to the 4th point, children and adolescents are experiencing adversity and more so if they already had problems before COVID came along. And furthermore, Goldfeld has noted that job losses and reduced income in parents is a risk factor for harsh parenting and maltreatment of children. But the job loss actually applies to the children. Their future job prospects by missing school are reduced, and even their life expectancy is reduced as a consequence of having poorer job outcomes. So this is not trivial. So the TGA in Australia approved last year Pfizer vaccine in teenagers, and then in 5 to 11-year-olds, and then this year in 6 to 11-year-olds for Moderna. There are a number of issues that concern people, parents and GPs, myocarditis, long-term safety of an mRNA vaccine, how good is natural immunity, do we actually need vaccination of healthy young children under 5, which is being proposed but hasn't been decided upon. So ATAGI has a number of recommendations. They're listed and summarised here. At the moment, it's from 5 years of age and above, and it's a 2-dose schedule using Comirnaty or using Spikevax as of 2022, Spikevax being the Moderna product. And although there's a priority for using Comirnaty, the Pfizer product, the other mRNA can now be used from 6 years of age and above. And the focus is on Indigenous kids, children in remote communities, and children with the lists of hematological and immunocompromising conditions on this slide. I'm not going to read it out. Not only immunosuppressed children at real risk, but children with complex medical problems, especially neurological problems like cerebral palsy, are at much greater risk of severe COVID and death. So what have we done in Australia? Through the National Centre of Immunisation Research is a program called AusVax Safety, a collaborative approach right across Australia, has been looking at the safety of new vaccines like Novavax. And they reported in February, after the child program only started on the 10th of January, they were already reporting on the first 20,000 immunisations given to children with day 3 safety surveys. Very impressive and rapid research. And if we go to the second point, there's been some recent concern that a court order in the United States has released Pfizer data on early vaccination receipt and safety in the US. Well, this is data that's over a year old, and we know it all already. The TGA has reviewed it. There's nothing new. There's no new safety issue, and it's old news. We have new news, which is more relevant and more important from Australian data in 2022. Point 3, COVID vaccination in children aged 5 to 11 is mostly with Pfizer, but before we started using it in January, we already had real-world experience on over 10 million children doubly vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine in the United States and with no serious or concerning safety issue. So before we started vaccination, we knew about 10 million children in the United States being safely protected. So you all know that you give vaccination with Pfizer 3 weeks apart, but for children we're recommending 8 weeks apart for 2 reasons. You get a stronger immunogenic response to the second dose with a larger gap, and importantly you get less inflammation if there's an 8-week gap, and so you have a lower likelihood of a side effect like myocarditis or other inflammatory side effects. So the research by Ausvac Safety has shown that children aged 5 to 11 actually have fewer side effects following their first dose than teenagers. So that's really good. If we go to the fourth point, these common side effects are expected to occur. They're local or they're systemic with headache and fatigue, and they're mostly gone within 3 days. Australian data, Nick Wood's quote, the last point, Australian data analysed to date are extremely reassuring and are in line with what has been observed for this group internationally. Myocarditis, 2 minutes on this. You know the symptoms: shortness of breath, fatigue, palpitations, chest pain, and it is reported in up to 1 in 10,000 teenage boys after the second dose of Pfizer or Moderna. 1 in 10,000 teenage boys after the second dose. Less common in other settings with females, first dose, it's younger or older. So there's guidance on the management, and if you go to whether or not you have an underlying cardiac condition, most pre-existing cardiac problems are not regarded as contraindications to vaccination. That's on the left of the slide, and on the right you can see that if there'd been recent within the last 6 months inflammatory cardiac disease, consult yourself as a GP or consult a cardiologist if you need extra help. Now here's a graph showing very starkly how the report of myocarditis is especially in older teenagers, 16, 18, up to 20. And the timing is also extraordinary. It's especially after the second dose, and it's especially within 1 to 4 days. You can see that on the left-hand part of the slide. And if we look at males versus females, we see that in 12 to 17-year-olds, the risk after dose 1 in females is 9.1 on the top row, and 66.7 after the second dose in males. So the ATAGI advice is if you've experienced myocarditis, use a different vaccine next time. It's unlikely that it'll occur after the first dose, but it can. And you can defer future doses of Pfizer COVID until the cause of the problem has been excluded and assessed by a cardiologist. Take-home messages are in the bottom half of this slide. Seek cardiology advice is the last thing if there is a case of myocarditis. And the third point, mild cases can be treated with non-steroidals for symptomatic relief. And as I've said to parents who've consulted me, avoid high-intensity exercise in the days after vaccination, because that's when the symptoms may occur. Vaccine hesitancy, just a couple of minutes on this. I've been a proponent of explaining the safety and effectiveness of vaccines for over 30 years. And I take a narrative approach. I help people to understand in a personal kind of way. Information is important, but telling stories helps. Compassion and consultation is important, and a big part of that is just listening to what the concerns of the parent or the patient are. I like to point out that we have rights, but we also have responsibilities. We have individual rights and we have responsibilities to our family and our community. And decision aids can be very useful. I'm going to refer to some in the next slide. Our politicians can make a real difference. They can do great things for good. 5 years ago, we introduced vaccination of pregnant women against pertussis, whooping cough, because of a direct approach partly to Turnbull and Greg Hunt. I also like to point out the issue of clear and present danger. You know the Harrison Ford movie, or maybe you weren't born then. But clear and present danger motivates people to get a vaccine. And I want to talk about another Harrison Ford movie, Blade Runner, in a minute. So there's a decision aid available for 5 to 15-year-olds, and it goes through 5 issues listed on this slide. And that's available from the National Centre, so that's National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance. And there's also one available from the Immunisation Coalition called Coracle that looks at your age and your sex and your risk of disease versus your risk of vaccination by way of complications or side effects. So healthcare providers are encouraged to use decision aids during their consultations. Couldn't do a lecture without mentioning Trump. Sorry if that bores you. Back in October, he had COVID, October 2020. And he got the best treatment available at the time, a monoclonal antibody called Ronapreve, a combination of casirivimab and imdevimab. And he had it quickly. He had 6 mils of each given intravenously. And he also had treatment with high-dose steroids and oxygen. And he told his advisors, I'm going to get over this, and he did, and I'm going to then stand up and rip my white shirt open and reveal a Superman t-shirt. Clearly he had steroid psychosis. Not that he didn't have a pre-existing problem with his mental health, but that's another story. Don't sue me. What about Trump and Ronapreve? Well, it worked, but now we've got Omicron, and the new variant is not well protected by Ronapreve. However, BA2, the second variant, may be better protected. What we do have right now is intravenous sotrovimab, available from GSK, in infusion clinics at hospitals, and maybe, potentially, in aged care too. So there are treatments coming. They're not experimental anymore because they've been gone through RCT and real-world experience. But, you know, Trump didn't inspire us, but someone who you might find inspiring or not, but interesting, is, you might be able to see her face on there, is a certain Tasmanian senator. And her advice as a politician to her colleagues and the general public to promote vaccine uptake was be a goddamn bloody adult and put others before yourself, responsibilities and rights. Some of you may guess that this is the Archibald Prize from 2021. It's a 100-year-old man. People of age can have high quality of life and they can benefit from oral treatment with molnupiravir or IV treatment with sotrovimab. Evusheld, I'll come back to that one more time. It's the AstraZeneca product for pre-exposure prophylaxis. It may even be effective as a treatment too, but that's still being studied. It's a long-acting antibody. There are 40,000 doses available in the National Medical Stockpile. About 2% of people are at risk. Did you know that 40% of admissions for COVID are in people who are immunosuppressed? You may need twice the standard dose intramuscularly because Omicron is somewhat immune evasive. So I want to now discuss the rise and the fall of Omicron and the Blade Runner effect. What actually happened with Omicron? Because it spread so very fast, it actually went away quite fast as well. The light that shines twice as bright shines half as long. That was what Rutger Hauer's character was described as. He was a replicant, kind of a robot. So is it true? Well, actually, there's been a tale. There's been a tale because of two things. It's an apparent trail, not real, because as it spreads around the country, you see more cases in places that haven't had Omicron BA2. or BA1. So the tail is a bit longer, and also because vaccination is not completely protective against infection. So some people, despite vaccination, are getting infected. And I'll tell you more about that in a moment. So I don't have time to go into the detail, but there are 13 mutations in the Omicron S gene, which are rarely seen in other SARS-CoV viruses. If we drop to the final point, prior to the emergence of Omicron, those mutations would have been predicted to actually decrease the fitness of the virus. So contradictory, how did it become so transmissible? It's a bit of clever science. The proposal is that the mutations in several different clusters in the virus cooperatively interact to mitigate their individual fitness decline cost and adaptively alter and increase the function of spike to make it bind better and inject better into the human cell. So I've just turned 60, and so I like to sometimes call myself Astra Boy because I had 2 doses of Astra in 2021. That's the blonde hair. It's grey now. And I also had my booster at Christmas, and I did have mild breakthrough Omicron, 3 days of respiratory symptoms. So vaccine is important for preventing severe disease, hospitalisation and death, not necessarily mild infection. So someone who's old, male and fat like me is helped by being vaccinated 3 times. The best immunity indeed from research published both in Science and Nature is hybrid, immune-induced plus native virus-induced, the 2 combined. But 3 doses of vaccine are very protective too. So the Immunisation Foundation of Australia began 10 years ago after a family lost their baby to whooping cough. And that same family then interacted with Malcolm Turnbull, as I've mentioned, are doing a program in April this year called, for World Immunisation Day, they're looking at vaccination and superheroes. And they're saying dress up children, preschool and the like, and donate families. The World Vision, of course, and UNICEF are promoting it too. And they've got a facility called COVAX. It's international. It aims to procure vaccine, to distribute it and deliver it into arms. Fantastic. And have you had a free vaccine? Put your hand up. Of course you have. So why don't you give back and pay forward? You can go to UNICEF, you can go to Immunisation Coalition donation. It's on RACGP posters. If you go to Immunisation Coalition donation, you can click on a link to donate. So kids and babies can dress up as superheroes, boys and girls. The former Prime Minister of the UK has issued a letter in March this year saying, why don't we quickly redirect over-ordered supplies in rich countries. Australia has done that ourselves with 25 million doses already, which is good. We can do better, but we've done well. But over 100 signatories said it's immoral and entirely self-defeating and an ethical, economic and epidemiological failure not to get vaccines to the people who need them. The letter urges world leaders to fund the next stages of vaccine development, treatment and testing, and provide protective equipment too for healthcare workers. Current vaccines may not actually work against future variants of virus. So they're promoting an immediate airlift of surplus over-ordered vaccines. We've ordered 130 million in Australia. We only need 60 million. As Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of the UK, has said, no one is safe anywhere until everyone is vaccinated everywhere. And he made that call to the G20, which includes Australia. We're running out of time, so I'll go quickly through this slide. The effectiveness of a third dose of an mRNA vaccine is very high. We go straight from the first line to the last red point. The vaccine effectiveness increased after a third dose, and it was highly effective in both the Delta period and the Omicron period in December, January this year. So the hospitalizations were prevented at a level of at least 90%. So that's quite impressive. I wanted to spend a minute on Novavax because it's so new. And the Serum Institute of India has worked with the World Health Organization to give an emergency use listing so it could be widely used in poor countries. So the Novavax vaccine has been pre-qualified because of its quality, safety and efficacy. And now the COVAX facility, I've mentioned already, can allocate and distribute vaccine to low-income countries. The work is based on two very big phase 3 trials. And as of March 2022, the last point, ATAGI in Australia has said you can use the vaccine as a primary course or as a booster if another vaccine is contraindicated. An indication for children is likely to be coming in April, May. So that's exciting and something to watch for. What about Omicron and beyond, as I conclude? Should we stop worrying about Omicron, the journalists are saying? By Christmas last year, Australia had 300,000 COVID cases, but by January 19th, less than 4 weeks later, the number was 2 million. That's an impact of Omicron. It is so much more contagious and so much more transmissible. So borders are opening in Australia in 2022. Flu and COVID variants are coming in and potentially going out as well. If you're going to be travelling, it's important to be fully vaccinated, and that's a minimum of 2 doses, and 3 doses is a much better idea. It's much more protective. Are we going to get other viral infections peaking this winter? Yes, we are. This April, autumn and winter, we're likely to get surges quite soon in RSV and in influenza. And if I had to predict, I'd say it will go RSV, flu, COVID. But, we can all be wrong. So overseas travel, you'll need to take rats with you. Some countries require you to have a PCR on landing. And GPs can provide people with a bill of good health to allow them to travel because they want to see relatives they haven't seen in 2 years. Coming to conclude, again about children, the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation in the UK, has said that children can be vaccinated, especially if they have a chronic medical problem. If they're aged 5 to 11 and they're healthy, the indication is non-urgent. So they're saying, well, some of them have had COVID already, some of them are healthy and you can have the vaccine, but no rush. You can get it from your GP. It doesn't need to be done through a rushed school program. But high-risk kids are really important to get vaccinated. The Netherlands say that if you had a child with disease, you can wait 3 months to get your booster. Some people have called for vaccination to be mandated. I don't believe that to be the case. Don't have time to go into the details, but in another talk I'd be happy to. What about daycare and preschool? They don't yet have a recommendation for COVID vaccination. The studies in the US are not yet supportive by way of safety and effectiveness. So we need more data. And the studies specifically show that children between 6 months and 24 months do respond well to vaccination with the Pfizer vaccine, but children who are aged 3 and 4 don't respond to the low-dose vaccine nearly as well and require a 3rd dose, which would be a bit impractical. So I don't think vaccines should be mandated in children. They should be carefully used. Is a new nasty variant coming? That's one of the motivations for getting vaccinated now for the nasty thing around the corner. Does the current epidemiology justify vaccinating healthy young children? Only just. But if a nasty variant is coming, to be vaccinated is to have a stitch to save 9. Some of you might recognise this from the Archibald Prize. This is Professor Rainer McIntyre, and different experts will disagree on whether we should rapidly vaccinate healthy children or not. And if you want any other useful resources, there's the Melbourne Vaccine Education Centre, there's the Philadelphia Vaccine Education Centre, there's my own website called omega.org.au, and Paul Offit, who actually invented the rotavirus vaccine, does a lot of really great education if you want to look that up. Frequently asked questions from the National Centre. There are those various facilities, and I'd like to stop there, and I'm sorry if I've gone on too long.
Thank you very much. Nobody can hear me. I have to find the microphone. This is Oh, I can be heard now. Very good. So this was Robert Boy, and I guess there's a lot of food for thought, and there are opportunities for different views here. But this was pre-taped, as Robert is in Australia and Sydney specifically, and again, it's too dangerous for a meeting like this to have this available online, and then it's interrupted and it doesn't work. This is not for discussion today. We may have another format for discussing items. I just want to go to the next presentation that we have today, and it is from Professor Heikki Peltola, and it is on measles. It is not on measles elimination. It is a lot of history and many aspects. And what you will find in the end is that it is really amazing. There is emerging treatments for COVID. There is nothing for measles. Measles has been eliminated, and you were part of it in Finland in the 1960s, if I remember correctly. And it's still a disease that is around for no good reason. It could be vaccinated away, but it is still there, and this is amazing. But this, what you will hear now in the next half hour or 45 minutes, is really exciting. You will not find it in any textbook of medicine or vaccination. So I'm very grateful, Heikki, if you take over today. And I guess if you press this button, it should go to the next slide. The floor is yours. And I step out a little bit.
Thank you, Joe. Hello, everybody. It's a great joy for me to have this talk on measles. And as Joe already told you, there might be some unknowns to you, as they were before to me. Some years ago, I questioned my students in the medical school that what is measles? Uhkarokko in Finnish is measles, and you can say that the answer by Antti was quite clear. So he did not understand anything of that, and he confessed that. So he was actually a very fair guy, and I had a really nice job to try to convince them that measles is really an issue. Measles has been known for thousands of years, but as we understand easily, it's not very simple thing to distinguish measles from other infections. And there has been a long discussion whether this was this Rades Abu Bakr Mohammed bin Zakaria al-Zairi many years ago, whether he really could distinguish morbus, morbillus. Morbus is a Latin and means a disease, and morbillus a diminutive of that. And he called this disease morbillus. He was a Persian physician and philosopher, and he was actually a musician, but began to study medicine at the age of 30 years. And his interest was especially in neurology. He was a prolific writer and discovered alcohol and sulfuric acid, for example. And in a sense, he's one of the Hippocrates people in our history. Or perhaps the first diagnostician between measles and other diseases was a man called. He probably distinguished measles from smallpox. He is best known alchemist who tried to reconcile Confucian ethics. So he tried to reconcile Confucian ethics with difficult doctrines of Laotism. And he dedicated his search for physical immortality. It sounds like this research is still going on. He was an observer of nature. He had precise descriptions on serious diseases like smallpox and probably on TB. Also, there was a Christian priest from Egypt named Arun, and he might also have been one of those diagnosticians for measles. But anyway, then we come to Thomas Sydenham. He was an Oxford and Cambridge alumnus, but interestingly, he had very little formal qualification, but a lot of good common sense. Again, I have some problems with this. No, okay, I could do that. And it was Thomas Sydenham who said that primum non nocere. And he was author of Observationes Medicae, and he's a sort of the English Hippocrates. Then how about measles versus rubella? That's a long story, and I'm not going to the details at all, but perhaps the name rubella was first used by Dr. Scott in Scotland. But it was actually only the Koplik stocks which were found by a pediatrician called Henry Koplik, actually, which helped really to diagnose measles from other diseases. And then we come to this very famous ophthalmologist who then was knighted from Australia, Dr. Craig, because he then could describe the ocular problems with congenital rubella. And since that, rubella has been known as a serious disease, especially for fetuses. Peter Ludvig Panum was a Danish guy who found something, again, very interesting. But before that, I show data from Finland, from my country, 200 years ago. And you can see that there has been repeatedly an epidemic, which very probably must have been measles. Smallpox does not behave as this, but very probably it was measles. And if so, these are the first documented epidemiological data on epidemics of measles. The church here just shows that our parishes in Finland have been collecting data also on deaths and have short descriptions on the death causes, and that's why we know quite a bit of these diseases. But now that Peter Ludvig Panum was a Danish physiologist and epidemiologist, and he did a very famous study in the Faroe Islands. He was a student of Robert Virchow from Würzburg and from Paris of Dr. Bernard. He was a professor of Kiel first in Kiel and then Copenhagen, Denmark, and he's also known for endotoxin studies. But let's go to the Faroe Islands, which are really islands very far from any other continent there. He published in 1846 this Danish very important study. And what he did was, and what the findings were, that in Faroe Islands, there had not been measles at all for 65 years. And then a cabinet maker from Copenhagen got infected before coming to Faroes. Then he sailed there and arrived to the Faroe Islands on March 28 and developed symptoms a few days later. And as a consequence, the islands experienced an epidemic in which almost 8,000 people fell down. So the clinical measles was found in 78% of the whole population, and about 3% of those died. But if the contagion dispersed to an infant, then the mortality was no less than 30%. So every third child died. But what is important, and that's what we remember now, is that there was not a single person in Faroe Islands who came down if he or she was at least 65 years old. That in practice means that measles infection gives a lifetime immunity. So the islands, by and large, have been very important in measles epidemiology. One example is 1951, where measles was brought there by a Danish traveler, and of the Inuits, only 5 out of 4,000 did not get infected. And so the attack rate was almost 100%. But the mortality was less than 2%, because already then gamma globulin was widely used. And in practice, we still could use during the incubation period gamma globulin, although the efficacy goes down because the antibodies in population are decreasing. Let's go again to another islands, that the Sandwich Islands, or we call them Hawaii. Young king called Kamehameha II was in power, and he allowed Protestant missionaries to arrive there and to teach people. And he cut down many traditions, but also did some very good things for society. He was a very capable man as a young. He refused Christianity and had 4 wives, and he was quite heavy drinker. And he made a state visit to London to visit King George IV and took along 2 wives. But what was fatal was that he went to opera and ballet and finally to Royal Military place, and here he got infected. He got measles, and the consequence was that he died at the age of 27 years. But before him, his favorite wife, Queen Kamahamalu, also had died. So they both died in London during this visit. And after that, it was a very big issue when the 2 bodies were brought back to Hawaii. It took about 8 months sailing back to these Sandwich Islands. But anyway, it was very well in those years' press. So by and large, there have been fatal discoveries after measles has been brought. And this is one very dramatic picture. We look here at the population of Hawaii. James Cook arrived there in 1778, and he was actually killed there. And within decades, the population of Hawaii decimated. The only reason was not measles. There was some other surprising disease, such as leprosy, which is very amazing. But there was, for example, mumps, which was one of the surprise a killer disease. Measles was one of the most important killers in those remote islands. But how about today? We travel quickly, and measles is still an issue. And for example, if you leave Brazil, then you are warned that you should be vaccinated against measles. And measles is a friend of poverty. From Glasgow, we learned 100 years ago that if in the same room the whole family was living, then the fatality of measles in children was almost 10%. But if there were 4 rooms available, then fatality went down from about 10 to 1%. And in Stockholm, we also have found that the more children, the more measles deaths in the same house. So the low social class associated very strongly with measles mortality. Peter Oby is still a very active Danish anthropologist and colleague. He has done fantastic job in Guinea-Bissau with all kinds of vaccination studies. And he, decades ago, challenged the issue and the thinking that undernutrition would be a very big risk for measles death. But he showed that actually it was not at all. He actually showed that very nicely in Guinea-Bissau that in the family with several children, the child who probably was going to die was not the child who brought the infection from outside in the huts. It was instead the second or third children who really died. Very interesting studies. He had challenged also the order of the vaccines in the EPI program, but so far his studies have not been taken very seriously into account. So measles today is a disease which mostly is not fatal at all or does not cause complications, but unfortunately sometimes can do, like in keratoconjunctivitis, especially in Africa, is one of the risks. And then we have this subacute sclerosing encephalitis, SSPE, which is very, very serious complication. The incubation period is very long. It's years. It's easily something like 4 years. But recent studies from Germany have told that actually the incidence is much higher than 1 per 10,000. And a more recent study from United States shows that among 2-year-old, the incidence of SSP can be as high as 1 per 600. The thinking before used to be that the risk for children getting measles is only 1 per 100,000 or so, but it seems to be quite common. And I have heard rumors that, for example, during the last years, Turkey has been one of those countries in which SSP cases have been pretty common during the last 10 years or so. So count your children again once measles has visited your home is an Arabic proverb, and that's something which we should keep in mind. But next, what is the common with the bomber here, Second World War bomber, and a monkey, and this guy? Well, he's Thomas Peebles, and he actually was an essential guy in the isolation of measles virus and also developing measles vaccine. He actually was a very active musician, played drum, but then went to Harvard University to study French. In 1942, he actually trained himself to become a pilot and was a real fighter bomber in the United States, in the Air Forces of USA. Then he turned his mind and studied medicine and went to meet Dr. Enders, who later got a Nobel Prize from isolation of viruses, went to work with him. And what happened was that then it happened in Boston that in a nearby school, there was a measles epidemic going on, and Thomas Peebles went there, collected blood and throat swabs, and said these famous words to a pupil, that young man, you are standing on the frontiers of science. And that really was true, because then Peebles isolated this virus from this 11-year-old David Edmondson. And Edmondson became as a known name because some of the strains for measles vaccines got Edmondson's name. So then there was some problems with Enders, and Thomas Peebles just cut the work there. But on the other hand, inoculated monkeys, and then got some of the monkeys infected. So some monkeys are really susceptible to measles as well. That's not common, but it happens. I also have been once involved in such a study. Anyway, those first vaccines against measles proved very dangerous. They were actually at the same time, two types of vaccines were developed. One was the killed vaccine, and almost at the same time, there was a live vaccine. And they came to the US market almost at the same time. And what happened was that those children who got the killed vaccine, they had, in the situation when they met again measles virus, they had high fever, severe affection of spiritual lungs and lymphatic system, and the thorax x-rays and all those imagination pictures are really bad. The antibody concentrations went very high after the killed vaccine, but also decreased rapidly. So after 1 year or so post-vaccination, they were almost nil. So the killed vaccine was so dangerous that it was taken away from the market in 1968. And after that, we have been working only with the live virus vaccine. So this atypical measles syndrome is expected to disappear in coming years, because it was only used in those few years, and only in the United States about 40, 50 years ago. Then we come to Maurice Hilleman, and I'm very happy that I knew him personally. Very bright, very nice and humble person. He developed these further measles vaccines, and what he did was that he actually combined measles with rubella and mumps, and that was quite a bright thing. And I asked him that how were you allowed to combine the three living viruses together in one vaccine? And he just said, of course, replied to me, well, Heikki, I didn't ask anybody. So that was possible in those years, and I'm very happy that he did. You can imagine how difficult it would be today to do something, because it was in those days, it was the general thinking was that you cannot combine two living live virus vaccines, for example, smallpox and measles. It was really, or yellow fever vaccine. It would be very difficult, very problematic and dangerous. But no, Maurice Hilleman did not talk to anybody and did it, and it was a total success. Here we can also see his daughter, Geraldine, whose name is very common for mumps vaccine. When Maurice Hilleman passed away in 2005, Robert Gallo wrote that Maurice Hilleman was the most successful vaccinologist in history, and he probably was right. So in Finland, we have been among the countries using very actively this MMR vaccine, or measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. As you can see that the success has been just very good. Our own measles has been gone now for a couple of decades, but so mumps and rubella also have disappeared. We sometimes see some cases brought from abroad, but they are very uncommon. But I'm afraid that sooner or later we will see a small, minor, hopefully minor epidemic of measles, because about 2% of our population still refuse vaccinations, and during decades we get more and more population who are in danger, and that means that today we already have hundreds of thousands susceptible people in Finland living without immunity against measles. So let's see what happens. But generally speaking, the thing that has been good. Amazingly enough, there's a post-punk rock band in the United States which has taken measles, mumps, rubella, and had the opportunity. I would play a sample to you, but let's see what happens. Perhaps it will be done later on. MMR vaccine, for reason which I already said, because there are three live viruses together in the same vaccine, was deemed dangerous. And that was the general thinking in Finland as well. And we performed years ago a double-blind study in more than 1,000 twins in Finland, and you can see what happened here. The red lines are the vaccinees, and the control group are the green lines. And the curves upwards, they are after the first vaccine, after the first dose of injection, because every other twin got the vaccine, every other placebo, and then the downwards curves, they show what happened after the second dose of injection. And as you can see that there's no much difference at all. If the measles vaccine caused some problems, which usually was fever, it happened mostly during the second week after vaccination. In local reactions, there was no difference at all, which is very understandable, because if you penetrate skin with any needle, of course you will get some symptoms there, and that's why it did not matter whether that was a measles vaccine needle or placebo needle. And also look if fever, very clearly that if fever developed, then it happened during the second week post-vaccination. But virtually no high fever at all, nor in the placebo group, nor in the vaccinees. About 25 years ago, there was a very big issue of MMR and autism. That the whole hullabaloo was caused by this guy here down. He was a gastroenterologist and surgeon. And what he did was that he could publish in the Lancet a series of 12 vaccinees with MMR, and some of those then developed autism. But one of the amazing things was that some of the cases of autism developed a few days, and sometimes some after weeks or several weeks after MMR vaccination. So nobody really understands how can you connect MMR with an autism which would develop, let's say, within 2 or 3 days. Absolutely impossible. And the end result was that although he could publish this in the Lancet, then the general view is, and many studies show that this study was just a fake study, and the opinion is that this very publication was likely the most destructive paper of the 1900s clinical medicine, and the Lancet actually just they took that away from the data. So you cannot anymore find that in the Lancet files. But how sensitive is the balance between vaccination and measles is shown here in UK, for example. Due to this big hullabaloo, there were some children who were left unvaccinated. And as you can see the bars here, that there was no very big decrease in vaccination activity, but the consequence was very clear. The cases of measles really skyrocketed after that. And after that, UK has improved the situation, and measles right now is not a major problem there, but unfortunately in many other countries it still is. And this is a quite good example what can happen. There were 29 German teenagers visited Sweden by bus, and at departure one girl fell ill, and 2 days later in Sweden they went to a doctor who misdiagnosed the disease and food allergy. But the condition of the girl deteriorated, and then the parents organized an emergency flight home back to Germany, and their dermatology diagnosed measles. But anyway, these 28 teenagers continued the bus tour in Sweden, and 1 week later, 3 other girls all fell down. Now the disease was misdiagnosed of scarlet fever, and penicillin was prescribed. But soon after that, the bus was taken back to Germany in a ferry, and during that trip, one 15-year-old girl deteriorated and died. So what happened was that measles was diagnosed by 3 methods in this death. That was encephalitis, for example, was one of the diagnoses, and none of the 4 teenagers, and they were the only teenagers among those 29 who were not vaccinated and all got measles, and the case fatality rate was 25% in this very case. So this is a real life experience which should be brought in mind. So how many doses we need? There was in Helsinki a small school some years ago, and an epidemic broke there. And what we then found was that if the child had experienced measles, there was no case at all among the measles cases. or with previous measles disease. But then there were some children who had been vaccinated for some reason 3 times, and if you compare the risk of 2 times vaccinated, the risk was 10 times higher than among those who had been 3 times, and no less than 16 times higher. So 3 times vaccination, 2 vaccinated, 7-fold increase in incidence, and only once the vaccinated 16 times higher incidence, which means that we really need more than 1 vaccine. And here's actually one major difference between measles infection and the natural measles. As you remember, that nobody in the Faroe Islands at age of 65 or more, nobody fell down. But with vaccine, although we are very good with measles vaccine, it probably at least 1 dose does not induce the lifetime immunity, and that's why we need more than one dose. So by and large, we really need to go on with our vaccines. It might well be that we cannot eradicate in my lifetime, or perhaps in your lifetime from the world, but otherwise measles vaccination is one of the very good things we can do for our children. To support people taking vaccine against measles has been advocated by many things. One of the loveliest is a choir singing from Uganda, where they use the hymn "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," but they sing with the measles words. It's a very touching thing, and I really wish that it could be played to you in future. So thank you very much, and go ahead and vaccinate yourself if you are not yet, or at least your child, with against measles. Thank you.
Thank you, Heikki. That was really great. That was really great, and I'm very happy with your presentation. I mean, again, it raises a lot of questions. But maybe while I'm working a little bit here on getting the video back, maybe we have a minute or two. We have 2 measles doses. Would you know any cases who failed the 2 doses in Finland? Or are there cases with 2 doses who got measles in Finland?
Yes, we have, not many, but occasionally it can happen.
Okay, so it's rare.
Very rare, very
And
rare.
are these subjects with underlying diseases, or are they healthy?
Just in principle healthy. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. So I think, thank you very much again. And again, no discussion, but a lot of items to be discussed. And I guess we go on from here. And now it's my turn to talk on National Immunization Technical Advisory Groups, or NITECs. And that is one of my favorite topics, as I was chairing a NITEC, the German NITEC, for like 10 years. So what you see here on this picture is vaccination roughly 100 years ago. You see here on the bench, there is a manufacturer. He has a little scalpel, and he is unroofing one of the vesicles of this cow with cowpox. And this is the factory, the cow is the factory. This is the licensing authority looking what the manufacturer is doing. This is the pharmacist. He gets money for taking the scalpel or the lancet, from the physician or from the manufacturer, and he gives it over, and he gets money to give it to the vaccinator. And that's you out there who vaccinate children. And these are certainly the vaccinees in a school-based program. Some countries still have these. Some countries, it wouldn't even work. Like in France, I guess school-based programs stopped because of concerns of parents that they wouldn't want a specific vaccine, and then they came up with multiple sclerosis. None of that is true, but anyway, in many school-based programs are killed ever since. And finally, the big question is, who is this guy here? And you would say it's the teacher, but in real life, this is an NITEC. The teacher recommends the vaccine, and he has the authority. He is the science person. He knows how to read and to write. And if he says, do it, you will do it. Let's look at it at a little bit broader scope. if you want to bring a new vaccine to a population, or if you want to market it worldwide, the first thing is you need a license. And different from all other medical products, you not only need a license, but you also need a recommendation. No recommendation in most countries means it's not used. The next consideration is the recommendation paid for. The next is there other reasons to vaccinate? Is there something like best practice? Like sometimes we have scientific societies for multiple sclerosis, for Crohn's disease, whatever, and they give best practice recommendations, which may differ from the general recommendations of the NITAC. Then there is a patient preference. The patient may say, but I want to have the vaccine, or I don't want it. And then there is the real vaccine use. And this all has to get together somehow. I think the most important step, the first step, is really to get a license. There are many vaccine candidates out there, and most of them fail because there is no pathway to licensure. That is the most important thing. If you have a new vaccine idea, a new vaccine candidate, can I get a license for this product? But once you have that, the question is recommendation, yes or not. And recommendations are based on evaluating benefits and risks of the recommendation. For license, there is a clear pathway from the idea to the license. In principle, and you can negotiate with the licensing authorities. They will tell you in a very formal way and in a very formal procedure what you can do or what you should do. This can be agreed upon, but for recommendations, there is no pathway. This is like going to court. You have no idea what the outcome will be. What are the challenges for a NITAC? It is the public health perspective. Number one, you need the science. Number two, if you have a great product, you want it to be recommended, you want to have it out there in your country, you need the money. Financing is important. Then the question is, if it is out there, is there acceptance? That was one of the issues with COVID vaccines, right? There were vaccines out there, and still today, we don't yet have the recommendations and the acceptance in the public that we would like to see. And finally, cooperation is important. Many things have to come together to make it happen. It's not only the recommendation, you have to make sure the product is there. It happens again and again that there is a recommendation, but the product is gone. And just as a reminder, producing pneumococcal conjugate vaccine takes 1 year. Producing TBE vaccine takes 2 years. So your recommending body must be in close contact with the manufacturers to make sure that the recommendation can be implemented. Well, we have here now recommendations. They are based on the benefits of vaccination. I would like to substitute this with science, financing, acceptance, and cooperation. That is how, ideally, how it works in real life, and this is what you have to consider. So a NITAC, or a vaccine technical committee, provides independent evidence-informed advice to assist public officials in immunization policy formation. And that is actually something that WHO came up with. They have formal criteria. How should a NITAC look like? How should it be organized? And basically, there are 6 criteria for a NITAC, how they should be implemented. They have to come up with a vaccination calendar. They have to look into reimbursement. They have to have some idea about insurance. They have to be able to give individual advice, and promotional activities is not part of what a NITAC should be doing. That would discredit the science. Again, in addition to NITAC recommendations, there are non-NITAC recommendations by scientific societies or by occupational health, by whatever type of physicians that take care of a special type of patient. And very often there are alternative recommendations which are usually not based on science, but on beliefs and preferences. What I want to do now in the next few minutes is look at the internal technicalities for the NITACs and then at the external framework, how they work. And again, now this is the 6 WHO criteria for a NITAC. A NITAC that is, so to say, a WHO type NITAC has formal written terms of reference. Second, they are written down, their existence is written down in a law. There is an administrative base. You cannot say, we kick you out tomorrow. They are there to be there long term. The third point is there must be a diverse array of expertise. There should be pediatricians, public health experts, infectious disease experts, epidemiologists, immunologists, and others. So this is very important. It is not just the pediatricians who run the show, but it is a diverse group of experts. In addition, many NITECs, not all, have liaison members from regulatory agency. That is important. If you come up with a recommendation, but you don't have a license, or the license will not be there on time, that makes no sense. The military is interested in the topic, insurance companies, scientific societies, the legal departments, and the Ministry of Health are very often liaison members, non-voting members of NITECs. NITECs should meet at least once per year. Usually they meet more often. The agenda has to be distributed at least 1 week prior to the meeting, and background documents have to be included. And there is certainly the requirement to disclose any potential conflict of interest. These are the formal NITEC criteria set forth by WHO. And what you see here, these green countries, 120 of them, already have a NITEC type, have a WHO type NITEC, and that is data from 2019. So I trust by today, there is even more. For terms of reference, there are similar criteria. I don't go into details here. Important here to say a NITEC should not have a role to support funding, planning, implementation, or advocacy. That has to be done by other stakeholders. The NITEC is the science body who looks at all available evidence, and it tells you how to best use the vaccine to protect the population. And that is very often forgotten. It is not coming down with the best science and counting the numbers or the scores, but a NITEC should be goal-oriented. What is the goal of the recommendation? And it is not, is the score and the grading high or low? It is, what is the goal? And that is very important. I skipped these slides here. They just show you that all NITECs that are WHO type are somewhat different in what they do in details. And I don't cover this. It's just to tell you, in the end, they're all a little bit different, and they all take into account different factors for the decision making. And again, I skipped this here, and I just want to summarize this part now. NITECs around the globe all work and operate differently. And that means vaccination successes are country successes. If you're a vaccine manufacturer, you can come up with great stuff. You have to be successful. You have to be present in each country. You have to make sure the local data support the use of your product with benefits and risk, with financing, and with everything. That is the main message maybe of my talk today here. It is vaccination successes are country successes. And even beyond products and beyond recommendations, it is the single physician in each country who has to make sure that the vaccination program becomes a success. Now, we looked at the internal technicalities. Now I want to look at the external framework. The NITEC comes up with a recommendation. What then? What then is shown here, what is possible in principle. On top, you see the NITEC expert group. And here from this study, they report to the Ministry of Health. And if the Ministry of Health approves, there is vaccine introduction into the national vaccinations program. And that is what happens in most countries. In some countries, the NITEC recommendations goes to a national public health institute. That would in Germany be the Robert Koch Institute. In other countries, it may be Public Health England. It is a different institution in each country. But then it also goes to the Ministry of Health. And in the end, it may even go to the parliament or to the government, or there may be consideration and discussions with other stakeholders before there is vaccine introduction. Again, internally, they're all different, although they have to fulfill the same criteria. And externally, there are different routes. But the one thing that is always in the center is the Ministry of Health. If they say no, you won't get your recommendation. That is the basic understanding here. This is how it works in France. I don't go into this. This is how it works in Finland. Heikki, this is your country. I can tell you it is complicated. This is Germany, and again, it is not simple to come up with a recommendation. That is the point I want to make here. The external issues are very easy if you look at this is how it works in principle. If you go to the details, it's much more cumbersome. And it may take a long time before something is really published and out there in your country. So is NITEC work and integrity and function, is this independent and solely science? Is this real or is it fiction? The first question is certainly independence. I challenge a little bit that a NITEC is fully independent because most of NITEC members are government workers. Most of my academic life, I worked for government, and I can tell you if there was ever strong influence on my thinking and on my decisions, it was the government and it was not industry. But anyway, the independent is important. You can select members for your NITEC, and by that, you already push them in a certain direction how to recommend. If you only have epidemiologists in there and only 1 or 2 pediatricians or very few clinicians, you will get a different set of recommendations as compared to a situation where you have clinicians in. Clinicians make decisions for patients that are goal-oriented. They want this patient out of the hospital. They want him healthy and out. If you're an epidemiologist, you won't make a decision without having the score and the full data. And I'm overdoing it a little bit, but I can tell you by selecting the members, you influence the decision. The decision-making process itself is done in a scientific way. So there are different tools how you can do that. Grading is one of them, but the grading cannot substitute the decision. It is the basis for the decision, and then you can still say yes or no. Conflict of interest, again, very nicely in all NITECs, that is the prerequisite for a NITEC to be WHO type NITEC, is the conflict of interest versus financial aspects has to be declared. Unfortunately, there is no declaration on conflict of interest for government work. If you work for the government, you may be voting or be a member of a specific party, and you may or may not want a certain recommendation for whatever reasons. The capacity to collect and use evidence, national recognition, and NITEC funding, this is usually a given. But again, the first 4 points are the real important ones that matter in real life if NITECs have scientific integrity and are really functioning the way they should. To make this a little bit more transparent, a long time ago, I came up with an idea how to evaluate vaccination system in different countries. And what I used is a general management rule that when I first was on my way to become a professor in Germany, I had to take some courses, and one of them was to learn a little bit about management. And a very general management tool is you define your goal, you make a plan, you implement your plan, and you look every day, every week, every year, if your plan came true. You look how well did you do, you evaluate your goals, how close you came to your goals. Very simple item. If you want to own a private practice, that is your goal. Do you want to go to city or to the downtown Sydney? And then you have to see, do I get my money from the bank, or do I ask a friend? There are different ways how to do all this, but these are the 4 items that you have to think of if you want to be successful. And if you don't do this, you're practicing, right? You don't really mean it. Using this easy management tool, we came up with 8 questions. 2 for goals, 2 for plan, 2 for implementation, and 2 for evaluation. For goals, we were asking each country, do they have long-term vision, which vaccines they would need in 3, 5, and 10 years? And second, we would want to know, do they have specific vaccination targets, like measles elimination by 2020? It never worked in Germany. I think we had it for 2000, we had it for 2020, and we now have it for 2030. It's a target, but it has never been publicly known. So if there is no goal, how can you be successful if you don't have a goal? The next thing is there a plan? Is there only one plan and not 20 or 35, or one by pediatricians, one by physicians for adults, one by gynecologists? There has to be one plan for the population. And is this plan adapted as needed based on vaccine uptake and burden of disease in the country? Then is there implementation? Is there clear responsibility and accountability with feedback on success and failure to get it done? You can have the greatest vaccination program in the world. If you don't get it done, it's useless. Again, you're practicing and you're not doing it. The second point on implementation is to support implementation, you need national, independent, government-funded public relation campaigns. And the question is, does this exist in your country? And finally, is there evaluation? And there are two items. Number one, up-to-date vaccine uptake data. Was the vaccine really given? And that has to be timely. You have to have it every year, and you cannot have it at school entry only. That is 3 years too late. You want to have it at age 2 years. How many children were vaccinated against measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, whatever. You need to have this up to date so that you can react, so that you can do something, a PR campaign, whatever, communicate that there is a gap here in what is needed. And finally, you certainly want to have burden of disease data to make sure that your vaccine is working. This is the very principle of what we will see in the second half of the meeting today. And we will evaluate 8 countries with the questions, are there goals, plan, implementation, and evaluation? And for each of these items, there will be a maximum of 2 points. So the best a country can do, like England and Wales, they get 8 points out of 8 for their vaccination system. This is from the USA, and we will hear that later. The point is really, yes, you really have to mean it. You have to be managing your vaccination program. And I think what is really important and what people don't understand is they speak of vaccination program, but in some countries, there is only a plan. There are no goals, there is no implementation, and there is no evaluation, or implementation and evaluation are present only in a very rudimentary and non-scientific manner, so it doesn't exist and it's not used to improve the program. And this is something, again, to remember from this presentation. A vaccination program has goals, plan, implementation, and evaluation. And if you only have a plan, that's nice, a nice start, but you don't have a program. And to summarize this here on this slide, for license, you need the medical need, you need preclinical research, you need clinical studies, phase 1, 2, 3. Then you may get the license depending on the outcome. Then there may be a recommendation, and there you need science, acceptance, financing, and cooperation. But this is not all. The whole framework that has to be there is around having goals, and not only the recommendation and the plan, but then implementation and evaluation. Payment usually very often follows the recommendations in many countries. And again, best practice, patient preference, and real vaccine use we talked about before. So in the end, while NITECs are independent on paper, in real life, very often they are bound by the local historical, financial, and political situation. And we are looking now into hopefully all countries in the world. We have finished about 30 countries of the world to look into their vaccination program and how well they are doing. And we give them scores. And I guess some countries are really not there where they should be. And the purpose is not to blame anyone, but just to say, look, this is what you have, and this is what you would need to be really successful with vaccination. Thank you very much for your attention. And I guess with this, I'm very happy, as we don't discuss today, I'm very happy to announce Dr. Yauba Saidu from Cameroon. Yauba, you will see him in a minute. He will shortly introduce himself. He will be here with a video clip. He is listening right now, but he cannot speak because all audience is on mute. I think it is very important, particularly for LMIC countries, low and middle income countries, to organize vaccine and vaccination services. This is really a very challenging task, and we in rich countries don't even think about it. We have from the refrigerator to all types of local, bringing the vaccine to the people is really challenging. And Yauba nicely summarized this in his short presentation. So thank you, Yauba, for doing this. And with all my best greetings to you in Cameroon right now, I hope I can, yeah, it does work. Now, here he is.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. It is actually a pleasure for me to be with you today, and I'm excited to present to you Chapter 18 of the Essentials of Vaccinology. My name is Yauba Seidu, and I am currently the Country Director for Clinton Health Access Initiative. So I'd like to ask for your permission to close my camera because we do have low internet bandwidth, which might affect the streaming. So with your permission, I will shut down my camera and then start sharing my screen. My chapter is entitled Organization of Immunization Services for Public Health, and my presentation is structured around 7 themes, as you can see on this slide: an introduction, planning, immunization services, vaccine management and service delivery, immunization safety, new vaccine introduction, disease surveillance, and a conclusion. So in terms of introduction, we will probably remember that in 2015, world leaders endowed 17 interrelated goals, which they call the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDG, which are actually a succession of the Millennium Development Goals. Goal number 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals calls for the countries to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. You will agree with me that immunization is one of the key interventions that can help countries attain this goal, as it already prevents 2 to 3 million lives each year. Organization and delivery of immunization programs in many countries are often inspired by global goals such as the Immunization Agenda 2030. This agenda is one of the key strategies that will govern immunization programs over the next decade. And the agenda, as you probably will see from this slide, outline an audacious vision and strategy for the decade that spans from 2021 to 2030, with a particular emphasis of leaving no one behind. The table to the right summarizes the 7 strategies of the Immunization Agenda 2030. As you can see, there are about 7 strategic goals that the global community wish to achieve between now and 2030. So in terms of planning immunization services, effective immunization programs are developed via a continuous progress that begins with a situational analysis to identify the problems to be addressed. Then definition of priorities, setting objectives, formulating strategies, and activities to reach defined objectives. Another important element is definition of indicators to monitor and evaluate the performance of the program. Again, estimating the resources and budget to implement the program is one of the key things that will need to be done during the planning phase of any immunization program. And lastly, in terms of implementing the program there is a need of implementing the program following a defined and agreed schedule. So when planning the implementation of immunization services, there are key thematic areas that should be considered, and this cuts across 8 to 9 themes, including management, funding, human resources, service delivery, vaccine supply chain management, EPI logistics, disease surveillance, and advocacy or communication for development. Next slide. This slide actually shows the coaching system and service delivery strategies that are often used to reach target population. The coaching system, as you probably know, is presented on the left side of the slide, and this system is actually the backbone of any immunization program. The system consists of a network of people, equipment, structures, etc., that enables vaccines to move from the manufacturer to the vaccine recipient, as you can see on the diagram on the left. In terms of a service delivery, which you can see on the right hand of this presentation, this service delivery actually refers to the approaches that are used by healthcare workers to reach vaccinees, to deliver vaccines to the target population. There are essentially four approaches. The first one is fixed post strategy or immunization, in which case the vaccinee receives his or her vaccine at the health facility. The second approach is outreaches, which is actually used to deliver immunization services to target population that cannot access or have difficulties in accessing a health facility that delivers vaccine. Often the catchment area where the population resides is greater than 5 kilometers, but less than 10 kilometers. The next strategy, or the third, is a mobile strategy, and this strategy is often conducted by district staff, and it involves visiting settlements in remote areas not covered by health facilities. The visit usually lasts for several days. 1 minute, maybe. So the next strategy is actually the periodic intensification of routine immunization activities. And this strategy is often used to raise coverage to a high level or to restore coverage in an area that has witnessed a sharp drop in immunization. In this slide, that is talking about immunization safety, it is important to highlight the importance of adhering to the principles of immunization safety to prevent or minimize risks to vaccinees. Protocols for vaccine transportation, storage, and vaccine administration must be observed by everyone involved in the immunization system to minimize the risks related to vaccination. Adverse events following immunization must be detected, reported, and managed according to established protocols. Waste such as needles and vials resulting from immunization must be safely disposed of following applicable regulations. Now let's shift gears to new vaccine introduction. For a vaccine to be introduced into a public health system, the vaccine must first of all be licensed by a competent regulatory authority. This approval follows a rigorous review of the vaccine quality, efficacy, and safety. Approved vaccines can then be considered for introduction into a country immunization program. For this to be done, there is a need for an in-country decision-making process, which in many countries is led by the National Immunization Technical Advisory Group, or the NITAC. Once the NITAC formulates a recommendation, issues a recommendation to introduce the vaccine, the country will need to develop an introduction plan. Prior to developing this plan, the country will need to conduct a situational analysis to identify gaps and address these gaps accordingly. This is essential to avoid running into troubles and to guarantee a smooth introduction. The final step in the introduction process is implementing the plan according to agreed timelines and schedules. And this implementation will involve distributing vaccines, training healthcare workers, updating data collection tools, community mobilization and sensitization, administering the vaccines to the target population, documenting vaccination, monitoring adverse events following immunization, amongst others. The next topic relates to disease surveillance. Disease surveillance, as we all know, is a core function for any vaccination program. Expanded program on immunization often use one of three approaches to monitor vaccine-preventable diseases. The first is passive surveillance, which involves routine notification of diseases by health facilities that take care of patients. The second approach is sentinel surveillance, which is used to obtain quality data that cannot be gotten via passive surveillance. In practice, sentinel surveillance involves selecting sites or facilities with the necessary human and material resources to detect and report on certain diseases. In practice, disease surveillance involves 6 steps. The first step actually relates to detection of cases or outbreaks using standard reporting forms. And the second step involves notification of suspected cases, outbreaks to the next level using established reporting lines. The third step involves investigation and confirmation of suspected cases or outbreaks. The fourth step actually involves an analysis and interpretation of reports of suspected cases and outbreak. And the fifth step involves monitoring and appropriate and coordinated response to the outbreak. And the last step involves provision of feedback to levels that notify the cases and outbreaks. So in conclusion, we must emphasize that to be effective, immunization services must be designed and delivered in a way to reach population who need them, irrespective of who they are and when and where they live. Effective immunization systems must have clear plans based on a vision of the future and a step-by-step process on how the vision will be translated into reality. The cold chain system is the backbone of any immunization program and consists of a network of equipment, material, people, processes, financial resources that enable safe transportation of vaccines from the factory to the point of administration to the patient. In terms of new vaccine introduction, many country programs will require coordinated decision-making, considering the burden of the disease, the characteristics of the respective vaccine, and the capacity of the immunization services to deliver it. Last but not the least, monitoring adverse events following immunization is an important component, as documentation of vaccine safety is crucial for trust in the vaccination program. Scientifically valid and timely burden of disease surveillance, as well as vaccine uptake data, are core functions of any vaccination programs and are needed for information of the public and for timely action. This brings me to the end of my presentation, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Yauba. That was really nice. And I guess that is your daily work in Cameroon. And yeah, it is not simple to get it done with limited resources. And yeah, this is where you are. And again, we don't have any questions today. If you think you would like to discuss something or need some clarification, please write me an email. You got the invitation from my email account, and I'm happy to try to answer your questions or address any concerns that you may have had. Hello, everybody. We are back. We had a nice coffee break, and I hope that our local technicality will be in a little bit better shape for the next presentations. I'm very happy after Yauba's wonderful talk about how to get vaccination done in countries, that we will have a look at 8 countries for how their vaccination system works. And the goal of Global Health Press is to have, like all countries in the world, evaluated this way. And we will have that on our website, which you find in the slides at the right lower part, www.idea.org. But we are not there yet. We are still collecting the data. In the end, we want to have like 100, 200 countries, up to 200 countries that are there around the globe. And if you think that in one of the presentations to come, there is a wrong scoring, let us know and send us the data why you think there should be more or less points for the different countries. Now, without any further delay, I'm very pleased to share with you vaccinations evaluating different countries. But now I delay it again. Thank you very much. Igor Stoma from Belarus. He is the rector of the local university, and he did a great job looking into his country. Yeah, Uba, you've seen him already looking at Cameroon. Dan Nichtel did a great job, and I guess it's the first time for me, and I guess for most of you out there, to learn about vaccination in Iran. Ahmed from Kenya, thank you very much for doing the work. And Christina sitting with us here today for the Ukraine that is in a difficult situation these days. We have Justin Tan, who will report on the Netherlands, and Akshayata Naidu on India. And I have a colleague from the United States who is joining us. And finally, I will also present on Germany, which is not on the agenda, but I squeezed it in at some point to have one more country. Thank you very much again. And now, without further delay, we start vaccinations.
Dear colleagues and friends, I'm really happy to be a part of this story of the World Vaccine Day. And my name is Igor Stoma. I'm a professor of infectious diseases, and I work currently in the city of Gomel in the southeast region of Belarus. Here on the map, you can see the location of our country. And basically, when we remember geography, we talk that geographically, Belarus is located in the center of Europe, based on the geographical size of Europe. And currently, this is the country that stands in the middle of East and West, actually. So today we will give some basic data concerning the vaccination system strategy in our country. So going further, the background information concerning Belarus, our population is about 9.4 million people right now. So a birth cohort is 82,170 people, with 1.46 million of people over 65 years. The GDP, according to the data officially published for 2020, is 5,750 euros per inhabitant, with healthcare expenses in 2019 around 2.26 billion euro. And I would like to underline that this is the pre-COVID-19 data of healthcare expenses. Of course, we had a much more healthcare expenses starting from 2020, and especially in 2021, based on the system of state funding of COVID-19. So all the COVID-19 expenses in the country were state funded. We don't have universal health care insurance, and actually we don't really need it. We have a position that every person may have an additional healthcare insurance, but in most of the cases you do not need it because our healthcare system is totally fully state funded. So every citizen of our country receives full range of healthcare services for free because of being a citizen. So this is the so-called Semashka Soviet system, or the part of it. Concerning the number of physicians in patient care, it was 55,000. We have a WHO type technical advisory group. It's available based on the Ministry of Healthcare. We have vaccine reimbursement, which is full vaccine reimbursement based for recommended vaccines only. And there's a list of approved vaccines for all the people in our country, so they're for free. And vaccine recommendations are updated annually, and especially based on our NITAG, it's quite inactive, especially during the COVID-19 times. There is a possibility of vaccine damage compensation, but it is a result of an official claim. Adverse events reporting is based on Republican Unitary Enterprise Center for Examinations and Tests and Health Service. It's an official regulatory and control system under supervision of Ministry of Healthcare, and there is a possibility to address it online and report online the official reporting of adverse events, which is often used by GPs and physicians across the country. There is a few discussions that we may discuss in the future, but currently concerning the list of vaccines needed for the future for 3, 5, 10 years, we don't have any official list approved, but they are regularly discussed within NITAG. Are there any vaccinations targets with date? Currently, we had only COVID-19 targets and percents of population vaccinated officially provided annually, and influenza vaccination targets which are also officially provided annually. Concerning other targets that are not the official data which is provided annually, there will be some internal data. There is a national vaccination plan which is revised by NITAG, and they're used. The recommendations of technical advisory groups are used as basis for vaccination planning by Ministry of Healthcare. And there is a continuous review of pipeline vaccines by NITAG, and the plan is regularly revised based on epidemiology data. Concerning the implementations, they're clearly indicated by Ministry of Health, and they're quite clear, and there are responsible parties provided which are in charge of implementation of vaccination. And there are government-funded vaccination campaigns. Of course, there was a government-funded COVID vaccination PR campaign, but there are vaccination campaigns concerning other vaccine-preventable infections. And still, we do not have any official impact measurement, which may say what are the effects, what are the clear effects of this government-funded vaccination campaigns. Concerning the valid studies and data on vaccine uptake by age, this data is collected and assessed by Sanitary Epidemiology Department of Ministry of Healthcare. Sometimes it's not easy to get them published officially, but these data exist and are being used for analysis inside the government healthcare system. Concerning the valid population-based data on all vaccine-preventable disease, the problem is that most of this data is not real-time data and do not cover all of the vaccine-preventable disease, just part of them. And also, beside the problem that they are quite old in time, they are not also officially published in the most cases, so we say no. Concerning the views for discussion concerning vaccination in Belarus, I would like to underline that the Semashko system that was fulfilled as a general strategy of infection prevention and non-infectious disease prevention in the Soviet times, it remains the basis for infection prevention strategy in Belarus. And we have fully state-funded vaccination system and a diverse sanitary epidemiology system with a number of epidemiologists that are in charge of vaccination implementation and control. And this is the diverse broad system under charge of this question. And they're controlled by the Vice Minister of Healthcare, the Chief Sanitary Physician of the country. Of course, the 1990s times was the time when we had anti-vaccination movement developed, and it's still being quite active, and it grew its activity in the COVID-19 times, we may say. And the problem is that some physicians are not properly trained to address the questions of vaccination hesitancy. They are not ready to discuss it. They're not ready to actively promote vaccination. Society is unfortunately highly affected by populist opinions, fake TV and fake news on the internet on vaccination. That's also a problem of a belief and a problem of reputation of official government organizations. Currently, we don't have local vaccine production facilities, so it made our country dependent from importing vaccines from either West or East. So currently we have most of our vaccines imported either from Europe or either from Russia. And we may say that there is a broad network of sanitary epidemiology service officials, and only few infectious diseases were included in the decision-making process of vaccination. So we need to include more ID physicians, more specialists in the clinical points of vaccinations, because we had a strong skew towards non-clinicians in our system of decision making. Of course, it could affect the practical issues of vaccine implementations. And to conclude, you can see the points, the score points for Belarus. And I would say still that even despite these points, there are numerous questions to be addressed to improve the vaccination system in our country. I'm grateful to have a chance to participate in this meeting, and would be happy to continue our fruitful relationships. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone attending this session. It is a pleasure for me to meet you all. My name is Yauba Seidu. and I am currently the country representative for Clinton Health Access Initiative in Cameroon. I'm really pleased to walk you through the vaccination system in Cameroon. Slide. As you can see from this slide, Cameroon has a population of roughly 56 million and a birth cohort of nearly 1 million infants. The population over 65 years old is estimated at about 260,000. In 2020, the gross national product was estimated at 1,500 US dollar per inhabitant. And in 2019, the healthcare expenditure was estimated at 1.46 United States dollars. 70% of it comes from out-of-pocket payments from patients. There is currently no universal health scheme in place. Overall, there are about 6,000 physicians. The country has a functional NITAC that formulates recommendations annually. Vaccination is free for infants, and there is no system in place to compensate for vaccine damages or damages caused by a vaccine. However, there is a system in place for reporting adverse events following immunization, which is managed by the expanded program on immunization. Adverse events are reported monthly via the district health information system too. The Cameroon API has well-defined goals and targets, and these are outlined in the country's vaccination strategy, which in this case is the country multi-year plan. In the current strategy, the country plans to introduce a number of vaccines, including the birth dose of hepatitis B, vaccine against malaria, and a vaccine against meningococcal meningitis. In terms of planning, the country do have a vaccination plan which is aligned to WHO recommendation. However, despite the availability of a plan, there is no continuous review of vaccines in the pipeline, either by the EPI or the NITAC. Reviews are essentially done in response to a specific need or availability of funding. Next slide. In terms of implementation of the vaccination plan, there are clear responsibilities and accountability, and these are clearly mapped out in the EPI annual work plan. With regards to campaigns, these are usually co-funded, with the majority of the funding coming from external sources. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, there are really no valid data on vaccine uptake like age, neither is there valid data on disease burden on all vaccine preventable diseases. It is important to note that some data are available on the district health information system, but the data are of poor quality, mainly due to incompleteness of data. This slide kind of summarizes some additional views for discussion. The country has a weak surveillance system and inefficient incident management system. This weakness makes it difficult, makes the country more reactive to outbreaks of vaccine preventable diseases. The country depends largely on external support in financing and implementing its vaccination program. The vaccine supply chain is quite complex, with no clear defined roles and responsibilities of the different ministries, particularly with regards to procurement, storage, distribution of vaccines. The NITAC, in its part, mostly issue recommendations on a need basis. The NITAC does not conduct routine evaluations of vaccines in the pipeline. There are also no clear procedures on how to expedite new vaccine introduction in case of an epidemic. There are several challenges with the cold chain system, including erratic power supply, lack of repair and maintenance system, heavy use of non-pre-qualified cold chain equipment, etc., etc. There is also a problem with vaccine equity, which is essentially driven by poor microplanning, inadequate human and financial resources. And last but not the least, challenges in reaching children in niche communities and fragile settings represents one of the key challenges that the country has to grapple with in recent times. Overall, looking at the different parameters, we think we can actually score the vaccination system for Cameroon. We can give it a score of 4 on 8. With this, I come to the end of my presentation, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Daniel Nikhtil. I'm a medical doctor and vaccinologist from Iran. I will explain the vaccine delivery system in my country, Iran. Iran is a country in the Middle East and Western Asia. It's bordered by Iraq and Turkey to the west, by Azerbaijan and Armenia to the northwest, by the Caspian Sea and Turkmenistan to the north, by Afghanistan and Pakistan to the east, and by the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf to the south. Iran has a population of about 85 million, with a birth cohort of about 1 million and about 4.8 million people over 65 years of age. In 2021, the GMP was about 6,500 euro per inhabitant, and healthcare expenses in 2018 were about 35 billion euro. Iran has no universal health insurance. However, there is a combination of social health insurance, which is mandatory for employees of the government, formal private sectors, self-employed persons, the military and their families, as well as for voluntary contributors. In addition, there are health care funds and also private insurances available through institutional health insurance funds or commercial health insurance. This country has about 160,000 physicians who are working in governmental and private clinics and hospitals. There is a WHO type scientific NITAC called the National Immunization Committee, with quarterly meetings providing annually updated recommendations. Recommended vaccines are usually reimbursed by the Ministry of Health. In Iran, there is not any documented plan for potential vaccine damage compensation. Adverse events reporting is managed by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which is division of the Ministry of Health. Regarding the vaccination goals and targets, there isn't any documented list of vaccines needed for the future. There are some vaccination targets for the elimination of polio, measles, and congenital rubella syndrome, but they are very old and were discussed in 2014. About the vaccination plan, there is only one national vaccination plan by the WHO type NITAC, which is National Immunization Committee, but there isn't any documented review plan and data for pipeline vaccines. Regarding the implementation plan, there are clearly defined responsibilities and accountabilities for the implementation of NITAC plan for measles and rubella, but they are old and related to the year 2014. Some government-funded national vaccination campaigns support the NITAC plan for polio, rabies, HPV, other than COVID-19. About the evaluation of implementation success, there isn't any documented and up-to-date valid study or data on vaccine uptake by age, and there isn't any valid burden of disease data by age group on all vaccine preventable disease. In addition, and as overview, there are some plans for vaccine preventable disease prevention in Iran, but the goal is not being followed actively by the Ministry of Health as the major authority. Iran has a weak surveillance system with a lack of adequate training. There is a strong belief that traditional medicine can act as vaccines, and some groups actively oppose vaccines and vaccination. There are lack of international pharma companies in Iran which can actively interact with the NITAC. There are hidden conflicts of interest between NITAC and Ministry of Health and some national pharma companies. In general, Iran has a vaccination plan, no goals, very old targets, old implementation, and no evaluation of vaccination impact on any vaccine preventable disease. Based on our data, Iran has a score of 4 out of 8 for the vaccination system scoring. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, my name is Dr. Ahmed Adam. I'm a vaccinologist and a pharmacist. I'm the head research coordinator, and I work with the county government of Mombasa in Kenya. So I'll be talking about vaccination in Kenya, which is very interesting, how vaccination takes place in Kenya. Vaccination takes place very effectively and efficiently in Kenya. So I'll be talking about vaccination in Kenya. The population in Kenya is 53,771,300. The birth cohort for the age bracket of 15 to 64 years is 31,671,946. The age bracket of greater than 65 years is 1,349,222. The GDP per capita in 2020 was 1,838. The healthcare expenses that occurred in the year of 2019 was 4,542. The type of health insurance, the universal health insurance cover, is National Hospital Insurance Fund, which is the NHIF. The number of physicians that are available here in Kenya who are certified is 5,602. The WHO type night tag is Kenitag, which we have named as Kenya night tag, Kenitag. The vaccine reimbursement is by some programs, and that is paid by the government. And some programs are funded by the donors, which is being investigated, or it's a study that is being conducted by the donor. The vaccine recommendations are available. The vaccine damage compensation does not take place. The adverse reporting that occurs is a collaborative initiative between the National Regulatory Authority, which is the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, and the National Vaccines and Immunization Program. So we will be talking about the vaccination goals and targets. So is there a list of vaccines needed for the future? For the age bracket of 3 to 5 years and 10 years? No, because that would be considered as too industry friendly. And are there any vaccination targets with date except for COVID-19? Yes, we do have vaccination targets that is being set up by the National Vaccination and Immunization Program, which are the national immunization targets that are set by the government yearly. The vaccination plan, is there one and only one vaccination plan by the WHO NITAG? Yes, and that is the Kenitag. Is there continuous review of pipeline vaccines by the NITAG? Yes, that is being conducted yearly, and that can be found in the comprehensive multi-year plan for immunization. The vaccine implementation that takes place, are there clear responsibilities and accountabilities for implementation? Yes. Are there government-funded vaccination campaigns other than COVID? Yes. The government-funded campaigns that are available is a collaboration between philanthropists like the Gates Foundation, and they usually sponsor campaigns for like programs like polio, if there is scare of outbreak for polio, or there are even other programs like HPV, where the government funds a little bit for the campaigns for HPV, and it is also encouraged by the philanthropists like the Gates Foundation. Vaccine evaluation, are there up-to-date, that is every 2 years, valid studies on vaccine uptake by age? Yes, there is up-to-date data that is available on national immunization data by age, and that is on the website for the DHIS, District Health Information System. Are there valid population-based BOD data on all vaccine preventable diseases? Yes, that is available in collaboration with the CDC. So I will be talking about, as I explained, what DHIS is. So we have an information system that is the DHIS2, and it is an integrated web-based platform with capacity to report all data from all the programs. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, works in collaboration with Kenya, and it has helped to strengthen public laboratory systems in Kenya which has created an integrated research and program center together with the Kenyan government. The surveillance data that is recorded in the DHIS is sent by the health facilities surveillance focal person to the sub-county surveillance officer, who then adds it into the DHIS2. Then from the sub-county level, it goes to the county level, where the national and the county officers access and monitor the data by assessing the DHIS2. And that is where they actually monitor how the information has been sent on the website for the DHIS information system. The adverse events surveillance that takes place for the reporting of vaccine is a collaborative initiative between the National Regulatory Authority, which is the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, and the National Vaccines and Immunization Program. The two institutions are responsible for the safety of vaccines and other biological products. So in conclusions, the PSS for Kenya is 7 out of 8. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, afternoon, night to everyone listening to this presentation from different parts of the world. My name is Christina Hrinkevich. I'm assistant to the editor-in-chief in Global Health Press, and I'm coming from Ukraine. I'm a medical doctor from Ukraine. Today, I'm happy to talk about vaccination in Ukraine, the country located in the east of the Europe. So let's take a quick overview. Ukraine has a population of about 43 million people. Its healthcare expenses were about 6 billion in 2019. That's significantly higher compared to the previous years due to the pandemic. Health insurance system is mostly universal and provided by a state. Private insurance comprises only a small part among general insurance systems. WHO type NITAC is available for whole country. All vaccine costs are reimbursed by the government, with exception for the HPV vaccine. For HPV vaccine, cost has to be covered from the pocket. Before, there were no damage compensation related to the vaccine side effects, but first program was launched and developed for the COVID vaccination. All adverse events are reported in online regime, normally from the general practitioners, from the family doctors. So first, we should talk about the vaccination plan. Is there a list of vaccines needed for the future? Yes. Unfortunately, due to the polio outbreak that did happen just a few months ago, a vaccination campaign against these diseases is launched. Vaccination against polio in Ukraine is free and is carried out in 2 stages. The first 2 doses of inactivated vaccine now, according to the vaccination schedule, are given to children as injections at 2 and 4 months. Unfortunately, the coverage now is not enough yet, and we need to have more inactivated vaccine. Another question is, are there any vaccination targets with the date, with exception for the COVID for sure? Yes, the Ministry of the Health of Ukraine stated a plan to ensure the elimination of measles and mumps by the year 2025 first, but then until 2030. Measures were put in place to ensure that a high level of coverage is achieved and maintained with 2 doses of measles and rubella vaccine by conducting a quality routine vaccination in all countries. Here, why this is so important? As you can see, measles outbreak did occur in 2001, in 2006, and in 2012, also in 2018. The following diagram shows the number of measles cases and MMR vaccination coverage in Ukraine from 1990 to 2018. The graphic shows that the measles vaccine coverage rates were really decreased after 2008, and that correlates with increased measles cases during this time frame. For sure, there are many other reasons why we have these outbreaks, but we can clearly see the increase of the general cases of measles after 2006. So a vaccination plan is one for all parts of Ukraine and should be updated, reviewed each year. Unfortunately, there is no continuous review of the pipeline of vaccines by the NITAC. At least information on this matter is not available to the public, and you cannot search it online. Okay, clear responsibilities and accountabilities for the implementation of the vaccination plans are put on the different departments of the Ministry of the Health of Ukraine. For example, the Center of Public Health of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine is responsible for ensuring the verification of data on the number of persons to be immunized against measles and rubella 2. Also, during the last 10 years, there were many government-funded vaccination campaigns, especially to support measles vaccinations, but also to support tuberculosis vaccination, as it's quite common diseases in Ukraine. This is quite important, as the main reason for low vaccine coverage is vaccine hesitancy among all people in Ukraine. However, it's hard to relate how beneficial these campaigns were, as in the past, people didn't trust anything the government said. Regarding the evaluation of the vaccination, there is no up-to-date every 2 years valid studies or data on vaccine uptake by age, and no valid population-based burden of the disease data on the vaccine preventable diseases. There are some for the measles, but it's not for all of the diseases. And for some, there are no available data at all. The problem of that is also that still some doctors keep all the records on paper and not online, and it's hard to centralize all the information together. So additional views for discussions. First, it's vaccine hesitancy. Why it's so important is because it's one of the major problems that reduce vaccination uptake in Ukraine, and this hesitance is huge. For example, despite the risk of health, only 1 in 5 Ukrainians have received a full course of COVID vaccine. Ukraine did have and does have a Pfizer vaccine, which is broadly used inside Europe. Despite it, some people went from Ukraine to Poland just to get shot of the same Pfizer vaccine. Recent mistrust to the authorities. One of the most common suspicions people had is that the vaccine was not safely transported, or it was not safely preserved in Ukraine. Many other reasons too. So the people didn't trust what they did hear from the government. Another challenge that Ukraine has now is the 2 cases of vaccine-associated paralytic poliomyelitis, confirmed in 2021, that became challenge for the global polio eradication initiative. Why? Because first, it was confirmed that children have been paralyzed after contracting polio, and which is the first cases of the diseases in Europe since 2010. So it's a new cases that did not happen during the last 12 years. And that's a challenge that global polio eradication initiative has to face, and the solutions have to be found. There are new programs in Ukraine to deal with the polio, but still the vaccine coverage is very low, and it's less than 50%. That is why it's hard to achieve in the nearest future any goals. That's everything that I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed a brief overview of the vaccination system in Ukraine, and have a nice day, evening. Bye.
Hi everyone, welcome to this session where I will be talking about vaccination in the Netherlands. I am Justin Tan, currently a master's student based in Europe. Firstly, some background information about the Netherlands. There is a total population of 17 million people, and the number of babies born in 2020 was recorded to be 170,000. For the total population aging at least 65 years old above would be 352,000. The gross national product documented at 2020 was at least 800 billion euros. For the healthcare expenses in 2020 was recorded to be at least 100 billion euros. Currently, there's a universal health insurance available in the Netherlands, and the number of physicians available is at least 55,000. The Netherlands also has the WHO type National Immunization of Technical Advisory Group. Furthermore, the vaccine reimbursement process is only available for recommended vaccines only. Currently, the Netherlands has an annual release of its vaccine recommendations. Furthermore, the vaccine damage compensation is also available to the people from the Netherlands. The adverse event reporting is being managed by the Netherlands Pharmacovigilance Center LAREB. Currently, the group has compiled 8 vaccination goals and targets. First, the first question would be having a list of vaccines needed for the future of at least 3 years. Currently, there are no resources or any published data of the Netherlands having any vaccine targets. Second, currently there are vaccination targets with date except for COVID, aside from COVID. And these are based on the WHO target. Furthermore, the average participation for all vaccinations, except for HPV vaccine, included in the National Immunization Program, was documented to be over 90%. Third, currently, the Netherlands has only one national vaccination plan. This is the Dutch Immunization Program, which is a voluntary program that offers childhood vaccinations free of charge, including the top 12 infectious diseases against children. Fourth, there is also a continuous review of pipeline vaccines by its WHO National Immunization Technical Advisory Group. These are vaccines in development for other potential future National Immunization Program target diseases, which are released annually. Fifth, there are also clear responsibilities and accountabilities for implementation of its vaccination program. The Netherlands publishes an overview of surveillance data and scientific developments of 12 infectious diseases, wherein the government regularly updates. 6, there are also government-funded vaccination campaigns other than COVID. For instance, when a baby is born, parents receive an invitation from the Dutch Immunization Program Center telling about its immunization program. This would include a letter, brochure, and a vaccination certificate for parents to read and set up for vaccination. Sixth, we also have an up-to-date wherein studies and data are being regularly updated. For instance, there is the yearly influenza campaign where people, the number of persons were measured. Compared to 2020, there's an increase in terms of vaccination in the general population. This would also be showing the importance of vaccination wherein the COVID pandemic also was encountered. Lastly, there are also valid population-based burden of disease data on all vaccine preventable diseases. The government updates its disease burden in terms of disability-adjusted life years of vaccine preventable diseases. To sum it all up, the Dutch immunization program has greatly helped the Netherlands in terms of preparing for any pandemic. Although it is considered to be strengthened, one of the key things to improve for the Dutch immunization program is to establish the list of vaccines to be deployed in at least 3 years in order to decrease the burden in the Dutch health system. In conclusion, the vaccination score of the Netherlands is 7 out of 8. With that, I thank you for listening, and we would hope to answer any of your questions.
Hello everyone, this is Akshata Naidu. It is a pleasure to have got this opportunity to present at the symposium on the world of vaccines and vaccination organized by the Global Health Press. I am a PhD candidate from VIT University, which is somewhere here, and I'm working on systems vaccinology. I graduated through an Erasmus Mundus program on vaccinology in 2019. The story of India is that it is a highly populated country with around 1.3 billion people. It has a birth cohort of 25.6 million and an aged population of 88.8 million. The per capita GNP is $2,081. The healthcare expense is 3.54% of GDP, which is around $95 billion, which is, as an absolute number, quite huge. But considering the population size of India, which is around 1.3 billion, still more resources are required. There is no mandatory health insurance system in India to opt for, but there are private and public channels which people can avail if they wish. The number of physicians in India are 1.2 million. A NITAG-like committee is present and established by the government, and it is called the National Technically Advisory Group on Immunization. Vaccine reimbursement and damage compensation channels are available, but I'm not sure how many people are aware of them or how many people actually take benefit of it. Vaccine recommendations. Yes, vaccines are recommended based on the prevalence of diseases and based on the recommendations from NITAG. There is an adverse event reporting system in India on paper, and it is done by a committee which is established on each level, like in the central level, then on the state level, and on the regional level, and where adverse reports can be reported. Adverse events can be reported for vaccines. Coming to the questions, vaccination goals and targets. Is there a list of vaccines needed for the future? Not specifically a list of vaccines, but rather immunization goals, like to increase the coverage of the vaccine or the immunization. And there are national programs for the elimination or eradication of diseases, which fuel future vaccine needs. But as of like for this year, there is no vaccine list for the coming 10 years. It is dependent on the vaccines available for the population and the industrial and government collaboration and many other things. So no, not a list of vaccines, but yes, there are immunization goals. Are there any vaccination targets with date? Yes. Like for TB, there is a date in 2025. By 2025, they wish for TB-free India. So that's a target. The same was followed for polio and it did succeed. Then there are other things like malaria, Kala Azar, and leprosy, which are being targeted and specifically targeted. So the target and establishing goal thing is managed by a program called Mission Indradhanush, which was launched in 2015. The objective was to boost immunization coverage. It is a Government of India initiative. It was put on Gear 4 in 2018, I think, and it is called the Intensified Mission Indradhanush. The idea is to put on resources on this channel so that the immunization coverage can be increased. It could be through communication or through making the vaccines more available or procuring more vaccines. There are different channels we can discuss later. It did work because from 2000 to 2014, only 3 vaccines were made available. New vaccines were made available under the universal immunization programs. But after the starting of the Mission Indradhanush, 5 vaccines were put on board in the span of 3 years, which is an achievement. It was the inactivated polio vaccine, the Japanese encephalitis vaccine for adults, rotavirus vaccine, measles rubella vaccine, and the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, which came into the universal immunization program. Second part is on the vaccination planning. So, is there one and only one national vaccination plan by the WHO type NITAC? Yes. NITAC is only established at the center, the central government, and not in the state level governments. The implementation part goes to the state level, but the planning is always with the center. So there is only one vaccination plan, which is implemented later by the states and by the districts. Is there continuous review of pipeline vaccines by NITAC? Yes. The NITAC sits annually once in a year, and they do review the vaccine pipeline. Vaccination implementation, are there clear responsibilities and accountabilities for implementations? Yes. There is an organizational hierarchy of responsibilities from the village level to the state and then to the center. So there are clear responsibilities. Are there government funded vaccination campaigns other than COVID PR? Yes. India has been very active in communicating immunization to its population. In fact, if I may, I can show you this ad. This is an ad for polio, and this is one of the mega stars from the film industry in India. And he was advertising for it, and there was a key slogan for the campaign, which was called "Do Boons Zindagi Ke," which means 2 drops of life. So they promoted it that way, and it was a huge success. Similarly, this was a poster released by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, announcing the release of the PCV vaccine and telling why it is necessary for children. A similar poster for the measles and rubella vaccine. So in terms of communication, India has been doing very well. About vaccination evaluation, are there up-to-date every 2 years valid studies, data on vaccine uptake by age? Yes, there are studies of vaccine uptakes and even of vaccination dropouts. So the data on coverage is pretty clear. I can show you here. So for vaccine evaluation, they collect these charts, like this is from 2018. This comes under Mission Indradhanush, where they see the dropout rate of the BCG and MCV vaccine, and then they target the areas which are red. They did target the areas which are red and which showed severe level decline of immunization. They go for the reasons behind that and try to solve it on an administrative scale. Then, are there valid population-based BOD data on all VPDs? No. This is the only point which I would say that is not available, is because there are channels to report a disease. Diseases are being reported, but a consolidated report monthly or annually, which can represent or mirror the prevalence of the diseases and what impact they are making on the population, is not there. That's what I wanted to discuss in the end, is about this particular challenge that India faces. Although attempts have been made by the government to get real-time data, like on the weekly basis, we couldn't find any documentation to consolidate or which could be translated as a BOD report based on which the NITAC takes decision on vaccination and immunization. We couldn't find it. And in fact, even for COVID, it is a problem because when the pandemic started, India still, since the pandemic, the start of the pandemic till now, India still struggles to come up with real numbers of the burden of the disease. It is primarily because of the size and heterogeneity of the disease of the country, because it is divided into multiple states. Then there are private and public channels to receive the data about healthcare, about diseases, which makes the entire system complicated. And plus, there is no universal data integration system. Like, you cannot put in a computer from each of these channels and integrate them. There are efforts made in this direction, but not quite as much as it is required. However, efforts are being made by national and international organizations to consolidate data from previous epidemiological reports and to set up a functional system for BOD reporting. And hence, India scores a 7 out of 8, and it misses a point around the BOD data availability. If I have some time, I wish to discuss about the intensified mission Indradhanush goals. The first is to strengthen the existing universal immunization program for improving the quality and sustaining the gains achieved through mission Indradhanush. To implement intensified campaigns for boosting coverage in low performing areas and among vulnerable population, to increase demand and to build vaccine confidence for immunization through communication strategy. I think that considering this is such an organized program and it worked so well so far, the BOD system or the data, the disease reporting system, and then a channel of making immunization related decisions based on these BOD data can be done using this channel, because it is quite nicely spread like a web across India, the organizations which are working on this mission. And I think that would be a key element to bridge that gap. So yes, I think that is it. This is the vaccine immunization evaluation form, which is used to see how many cases are there and how much is the vaccination coverage in that area and how many cases of that disease are prevalent there, to identify key strategic areas where work can be done to reduce the number of vaccine preventable diseases. Thank you so much for listening.
Hello and welcome. My name is Simone Coglan. I'm a pediatrician trained in Germany under Professor Joe Schmidt. Since 2003, I'm living and working with my family in the United States. Currently, I am a contributor to the Global Health Press Vaccine News Outbreak section, and I'm excited to present to you the data for the United States of America today. Let me start with some background information. The United States of America has currently a population of 333 million, a birth cohort of 3,614,000, with 54.1 million people living over the age of 65. The GNP is 69,734 in 2021 per inhabitant. The healthcare expenses are around 4,100 billion US dollars. The US healthcare system does not provide universal coverage and can be defined as a mixed system, where publicly funded government Medicare and Medicaid health coverage coexists with privately financed market coverage. Medical care is provided by more than 1 million physicians in patient care. The WHO scientific NITAG for the US is called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, short ACIP. The CDC recommended vaccines are reimbursed, and the vaccination recommendations are annually updated. The National Vaccine Compensation Program is responsible for vaccine damage compensations, and the adverse event reporting is filed through the US Food and Drug Administration. The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices was designated in 1972 as a federal advisory committee for immunization recommendations. The recommendations are based on a balance of benefits for vaccination, duration of protection, risks of disease, and risks of vaccination. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, sets the immunization schedule based on these recommendations from the ACIP. Just to name a few of the major milestones in the history of the US immunization programs. In 1986, the US Congress established the National Vaccine Advisory Committee under President Reagan to optimize the prevention of human infectious disease through immunization and created also the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act and the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. In 1987, a so-called National Vaccine Program Office was established through the US Department of Health to further hold authority over the CDC, FDA, and NIH. In 1993, the Vaccines for Children program was created, entitling children 0 to 18 years of age to receive all vaccines recommended by ACIP for free. In 1994, the National Vaccine Program Office issued the first US National Vaccine Plan with the goal to develop and improve vaccines, ensure safety and efficacy, educate the public, and achieve better use of existing vaccines. And the Affordable Care Act under President Obama was passed in 2010 and requires that all vaccines indicated on pediatric and adult immunization schedules are covered with no cost sharing. So under these committees, well-documented and reviewed guidelines for immunization programs are established for the US. To further identify 5 key functions for the US immunization finances, policies, and practices, Congress commissioned a report in 2000 named Calling the Shots by assuring vaccine purchase, assuring service delivery, by controlling and preventing infectious diseases, conducting surveillance of vaccination coverage and safety, and sustaining and improving immunization coverage levels. Now let me start with the score. Is there a list of vaccines needed for the future? Yes, there is. This is documented in a paper called Vaccines that outlines a national strategic plan for the United States for the timeline 2021 to 2025. This plan provides a national strategic, a 5-year roadmap for the coordination of vaccine development and use in the US. It articulates the vision and sets the goals and defines specific objectives and strategies to achieve those goals. The plan focuses on vaccines used to prevent infectious diseases as well as for preventing and responding to pandemics. Are there any vaccination targets with date? Yes, they are documented in the mentioned paper. Several vaccines are currently in development, including universal influenza vaccines, Group B strep vaccines during pregnancy, and an RSV vaccine. The STI National Strategic Plan focuses on the prevention of the 4 STIs with the highest morbidity. For now, there's only 1 vaccine available. Therefore, it focuses on increasing the recommended HPV vaccination. And the HIV National Strategic Plan is a roadmap for ending HIV in the US by 2030. But as we know, developing an HIV vaccine has proven to be a daunting scientific challenge, but the mRNA technology shows promising data. Is there one and only one national plan by a WHO NITAC? Yes, published by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. They developed the immunization recommendations for the US and are summarized in 2 separate schedules: the child and adolescent schedule for ages 18 and younger, and the adult schedule for ages 19 and older. The most current immunization schedules are always available on the CDC website and are updated annually. They are also published at the beginning of each year in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Report. Is there continuous review of pipeline vaccines? Yes, the ACIP holds 3 regular meetings each year, in addition to emergency sessions at the CDC in Atlanta, Georgia. The purpose is to review scientific data and vote on vaccine recommendations. These meetings are also open to the public and are available online. Are there clear responsibilities and accountabilities for implementation? No. The CDC recommended vaccines are available for everybody in the US, but the responsibilities are not clearly defined. and the implementation is pending on the patient's own action. What about government-funded campaigns? Yes, many very outlined and presented in very different modalities through the CDC. There are government-funded campaigns. Lots of information on vaccines in general, on vaccine schedules, reasons to vaccinate, detailed section on something called diseases you almost forgot, Q&As for parents, as well as how to get paid for vaccines, keeping track of your immunizations, campaigns on vaccination before, during, and after pregnancy. Are there updated data on vaccine uptake? Yes, and it is again the CDC who provides a website called VaxView. This website provides vaccination coverage data for all ages, and it is organized by ages. Child VaxView up to age 35 months, school VaxView, teen VaxView, adult VaxView, and also a section to view flu vaccination data and weekly results to monitor COVID-19 vaccine uptake. For more detailed information on vaccination uptake, there exists a so-called vaccine tracking system, which is a technology system that integrates the entire publicly funded vaccine supply chain, from purchasing and ordering through distribution to participating states, local health department, and healthcare providers. Are there valid burden of disease data on all vaccine preventable diseases? Yes, but local public health officials rely on healthcare providers and laboratories to report vaccine preventable diseases. The reporting is mandated by state law, but the list of these differs in each state. Let me conclude. The United States receives a high score with 7 out of 8 entry points. Goals and targets are well defined, 2 points. Clear plan regularly reviewed, 2 points. Responsibilities and accountabilities need to improve, but otherwise good implementation, 1 point. Well documented vaccine uptake and burden of disease data, 2 points. So let me summarize. Since the release of the 2010 vaccine plan, vaccination remains high for children. A child born today can be protected against 17 diseases, but there are still pockets of under-vaccination. In contrast, adult vaccination remains low overall. The annual burden of vaccine preventable diseases is particularly high among adults, with 1 million herpes zoster, 3,000 cases of hepatitis B infections, and 40,000 cases of pneumococcal disease. Vaccination coverage is showing a huge disparity among different races, ethnicity, gender, geography, employment status, and education. In response to this, the CDC launched its Vaccinate with Confidence framework to help reducing this anti-vaccine movement. It is built on 3 pillars: protect communities, empower families, and stop myths. This strategy focuses to find under-vaccinated communities and help them taking steps to protect them. Working towards building more trust in vaccines through expanding vaccine conversation and expanding resources. And to stop the misinformation from eroding public trust in vaccines and stop the spread of misinformation. Major issue lies in the uncertainties with responsibilities and accountabilities for getting vaccination done, because the CDC recommended vaccines are available for everybody. More than ever, and as seen in the corona pandemic, vaccination is very political and not purely science-based. And finally, a rich country problem for the coming decade. The United States will continue to face new and emerging issues in immunization and infectious diseases, where the public health infrastructure must be capable of responding to emerging threats, like providing culturally appropriate preventive health care. As the demographics of the population continue to shift, public health and healthcare systems will need to expand their capacity to protect the growing needs of a diverse and aging population. New Infectious agents and diseases continue to be detected. Infectious diseases must be looked at in a global context. Though the United States vaccination program has had notable success in reducing morbidity and mortality from infectious diseases, challenges in including disparities in access and vaccine hesitancy remain. Supporting access to and confidence in vaccines as an essential public health intervention will not only protect individuals from vaccine-preventable diseases, but it will also ensure the country is prepared for the next pandemic. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Joe Schmidt, and I'm going to evaluate the vaccination system in Germany. Germany is located in the center of Europe, as you can see here on the map. It has a population of roughly 83 million people, with a birth cohort of 700,000, and 18 million people are 65 years or older. The GNP in 2021 was roughly 42,000 euros per inhabitant, with healthcare expenses in 2029 being 41 billion euros. There is universal healthcare insurance. There are 400,000 physicians in the country, and there is a WHO type NITAC, which is called STIKO. There is vaccine reimbursement for all recommended vaccines. Vaccine recommendations are updated annually. However, this is incomplete due to lack of resources of the responsible public health agencies. There is vaccine damage compensation if a vaccine is publicly recommended. Public recommendation requires a STIKO recommendation plus an adaptation of the STIKO recommendations by each of the 16 states. So if you live in a state where a specific vaccine or vaccination has not been recommended, there is no vaccine damage compensation. However, if it is recommended by the local state, then there is this damage compensation. Adverse event reporting is accomplished by the Paul-Ehrlich Institute in Langen, close to Frankfurt. Germany has no vaccination goals and no vaccination targets. There was officially some documents indicating that there should be measles elimination. The date for this has been repeatedly postponed, and very importantly, and this is why there is a no here on the screen, vaccination goals like measles elimination were never made publicly available and were never largely discussed in the media, so there are none because in the mind of the people they don't exist. There are also no vaccination targets. There were some for COVID which were missed, and again there are 0 points then for the first evaluation. Is there a vaccination plan? The answer is yes. The plan most accepted is the one by STIKO because it usually, but not necessarily always, results in reimbursement. The STIKO plan then will also go to the 16 federal states, and in case the federal states approve the plan, then there is vaccine damage compensation as I had outlined before. Is there continuous pipeline vaccines by a NITAC? The answer is no. So overall, there is 1 point for the plan, although the plan is really, it needs approval by the 16 states, and continuous review of the pipeline is not done by STIKO, but by the National Public Health Institute in a time-limited meeting that happens once a year with industry. Vaccination implementation is not available. There are no responsibilities and accountabilities. If you go to a physician who opposes vaccination, you won't get vaccinated or your child won't get vaccinated. And others are actually very much pro-vaccination, like roughly 80–85% of pediatricians. They do a great job in getting vaccination done in the very young, but particularly physicians who are non in the pediatric field, there the STIKO recommendations are hardly ever implemented. There are limited vaccination campaigns. There were some for COVID. There was one half-hearted campaign since 2012, which was called Germany in Search for the Vaccination Card. I have never read any evaluation of that campaign, and no real campaigns have been started like what you would see in the United Kingdom or in the United States for HPV or any other vaccine. So I guess it's fair to say that there is no vaccination implementation. At the same time, there is only late and incomplete data on vaccine uptake in the country. There is some limited school entry data which are biased by those who don't come up with their vaccination card. So it is very difficult to assess vaccine uptake in the country for different age groups. There are not valid population-based burden of disease data for all vaccine-preventable diseases. For example, there is no tetanus surveillance, as tetanus is not transmissible from human to human. Overall, there is only data available from passive surveillance, and the COVID pandemic has nicely shown that this is a big gap in the healthcare system of the country. In summary, over decades, prevention and particularly vaccination has never been the focus of German health politics, and this, in my mind, largely explains why Germany is not doing well with regard to vaccination. In some federal states, local ministries of health even actively opposed vaccination. Rich country medicine is available, and many people believe that high-tech medicine or homeopathy can fix any disease. In addition, Big Pharma was expelled from Germany in the 1980s. There was, for example, the Behring-Werke with an advanced Acer pertussis vaccine already in the 1980s. I think this was a first globally, but they stopped producing any vaccine and they were sold to Chiron and later to Novartis and then to GSK. So Big Pharma no longer, or vaccine-producing pharma no longer exists in the country, and that only started again with BioNTech with the COVID pandemic. There is a lack of an appropriate NITEC industry interaction, and that results in vaccine shortages. There was the recommendation that everybody at the beginning of COVID should check if they have received their pneumococcal shot as of age 65, although the pneumococcal diseases virtually disappeared with COVID, but that was the recommendation, the public recommendation at the time. And again, the lack of any appropriate forecast or which vaccines are coming or interactions with industry, that results in negative consequences for individuals and public health. One example is certainly that the PCV recommendation for children was delayed by politics for 6 years. NITEC acts solely evidence-based but not goal-oriented. What I mean here is there is no evidence in the beginning of the pandemic that the first available vaccine against COVID would protect subjects 60 years above. The vaccine was licensed for any age group, for any adult age group, but the NITEC recommendation was to not give the vaccine to the elderly. That is certainly not a goal-oriented recommendation, but it's an evidence-based recommendation. And the disadvantage is certainly that vaccination of the vulnerable population started quite late. In the end, Germany has a vaccination plan, but there are no goals, no targets, no implementation, and that's why the total score for Germany is 1 out of 8. Thank you very much for your attention.
Brings us to the end of the second part of this meeting, and I'm happy that Professor Peltola and Dr. Rünkiewicz are still with me here. And as said, there are no discussions today, but if you have any suggestions, if you have different views, or if you have additional information, just send me an email. You'll find that in the invite that I sent to you. That brings me then to the part where I have to say thank you, first of all, to the organizer of the World Vaccine Day, Jim Scherer. He is listening to us. And thank you very much for organizing the World Vaccine Day and for the opportunity to have our little presentations here during your World Vaccine Day. It was great fun and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. I would also like to thank Daniela Lamarca, who is still here in the room, but not in front of the camera. And she is the publisher of Global Health Press, and she made this possible for us today, and also with Roger Stadler, who helped us with technicalities. I apologize, we had a hard time listening to you at some points, but I hope it was not too distracting. We will have the final presentations where we hope that all errors can be taken off, the technical errors, so it will be very nice for download. And you will be able to download this from the World Vaccine website, World Vaccine Day website, but also from the Global Health Press. Then I guess that is all the thank yous that I had to say, except for the presenters. I don't mention the names again, they are all in the invitation. And I'm really grateful, particularly for the young presenters, the vaccinologists who participate in this enterprise. So very, very nice. And I'm very happy that you had the courage to present. Even if you are a scientist and present your own data, it is always a challenge. And I think having the courage to do this is really something that deserves recognition. And I like this very, very much. Thanks again, Jim, for making this meeting possible and for organizing the meeting, the World Vaccine Day, and all the success that you want to have for your meeting and for future meetings. And thank you, everybody, for being with me here today to make this possible. Have a nice day. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Hi, Jim, I hear you. Jim, you want to say some words?
I would be happy to say some words.
Sure.
My name is Jim Shearer. I live in Westchester, Pennsylvania. I've organized and coordinated World Vaccine Day. I'm humbled to be among you all, and I'm very thankful for Dr. Joe Schmidt in organizing Global Health Press and all of these amazing speakers from all over the world. You have made inaugural World Vaccine Day a truly global event, and you're spread from east and west. I see Iran, Ukraine, the USA, Cameroon, Belarus, and more. It is truly a global event, and without the Global Health Press, the inaugural World Vaccine Day would not have been the success that it is. So I thank you all very much. I'm very encouraged by this, this lineup of speakers, and that next year will be even bigger and better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, have a nice rest of the weekend. Bye-bye.